Hey, what is up everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we will be continuing on with the building and deploying a full stack application video series. In this video, we will actually be building the front end part of this build. So let's actually take a look at the build that we'll be doing. It's quite simple. We'll be using Next.js Material UI for the front end, so to give us this nice components, these elements, UI elements, these inputs we can see here, these buttons, this nav bar and the grid, and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is Material UI, which is a React-based component library. And then we have Next.js, which is a React server framework or a meta framework that helps us render our React application and has a nice few optimizations for our React app that we'll also learn in this video. So we're going to have some basic navigation with Next.js, and then our elements, like I said, is Material UI. So we can create a new element or a new, so this application pretty much just creates notes or posts for yourself. It's not public, there's no authentication in this app. We'll be using the API that we built in the previous video. So if you're interested in learning how to build APIs, go and check out that video. Okay, so let's actually use this application quickly. Let's edit post 1. So we can see we have this nice modal popping up with fields already populated with the information. We can then update this. We can see the button activates because we actually changed something to this post. So we can say updated, and we hit update this post. We can see the changes reflecting in our website. If I were to do a refresh to get the data again, we can actually see that the post was updated. So let's actually go ahead and delete. Once again, we get this modal warning us, are you sure you want to do it? We can say yes, and then we continue. So this is the rest of the post that we have. Let's actually go ahead and create a new one. We can say new post test body. Okay, and create, and then we can see that post being up there. We can hit reload again, and then we can see new post is still there. So let's actually go ahead and delete all of these posts, and then we can see how the UI would actually react to there being no posts. And we're done. And we can see no posts found. So it's not this amazing app, but there's going to be a lot of things we can learn from building this, specifically out a full stack point of view. And then at the end of this video series, we'll be deploying this front end and the back end all together with the database and making it accessible to the public. Cool, so let's actually dive right into this build. Okay, so I have navigated into the front end folder that I've created. And in here, we will start initiating our Next application. So it's very easy to set up a basic Next application. All we need to do is run this following command. We can say npx create Next app, and then we're going to specify a version at, and then I'm going to just use this version. Go ahead and use the same version as me so that we are sure that we have everything aligned. Okay, and then we just hit enter, and this will then start the downloading process. It will prompt us with a few things. The first thing it prompts me with is what's your name. Currently we are in the front end folder, so I want it to take it relative to where we are. So I'm just going to hit a dot, and if you hit usually a dot with these, they just take the name of the folder. Do you want to set up TypeScript, yes or no? Always I recommend setting it up with TypeScript, but for now, just to keep it simple, we're going to say no TypeScript. ESLint is always great. It gives us some nice linting. Then we have Tailwind, which we're going to hit no. Do you want to use a source directory? Just hit no for now. Experimental app directory. This is coming soon. I think it's actually already out of beta, but we're just going to stick with the pages directory. And any aliases you want to set up, we're not going to set up any now, and just continue. Now it will run our installation, and I'll get back to you as soon as this installation is done. This might take a while. Okay, so here we can see we have our Next.js application set up. So let's actually quickly explore the files and folders on the left hand side here. So we have our node modules, we have a pages directory. This is going to allow us to have routing in our app for different pages. And this is actually a lot easier and, in my opinion, better to use than React Router. I know React Router has gone through a lot of changes now, but I still feel and find Next.js with the directory routing to be very intuitive and easy to use. No installation or configuration required. So we have this pages directory, and then inside of pages, Next.js also has a concept of serverless APIs that you can run. So it's cloud-based functions that you can add in here as well. We're not going to cover this in this video, but this can also be useful. We have our own API, so we're not using the Next.js server as our serverless APIs as well. But this is also a very neat functionality of Next.js. And then in this app pages directory, we have the _app, _document, and index.js. This index.js is our main starting point of our application where we will start building. This will be the actual homepage that we see. These two underscore are obviously important to Next.js itself. The app is almost like this is actually the starting point of our app, and we can configure like wrappers around everything here because all of our pages of Next.js will be rendered from this point. So we can do some like higher order components from here, or some context. We can wrap it around here from this point. So this is where our app starts, but this would be our first page. And you can see it's called home. And this would be any page when we visit just the / route of our domain, we would get this page. At the document _document, here we have the ability to edit that index.html that we get with a normal React application. This is where we kind of can configure things and add like headers for our entire application for tracking, and different types of software we can add in from here. So this is also 2 files that are required by Next.js, and they already come with the default. We can just go from here. We don't need to do anything as of yet. So then we have the public. This is just basic. Usually in a web application, the public means it's serving something. So here we are serving the favicon, the Next.js SVG, and some other SVG. It's probably backgrounds. And then we have the style, where we can create our modules, or style modules, CSS modules, because Next.js uses this module syntax as well. We also can see we don't have the module, but this would then be our global CSS file. Okay, so there are some defaults set up. So let's actually take a look. If we start this app, then we have some ESLint, we have gitignore, config, next config. So this file we will configure things for Next.js, and Next.js is very good at explaining its errors. So usually it would give you like an example of what you need to configure in here. Then we have our package lock, which is just node, and package JSON, and a README. So I actually want to use yarn. So let me go ahead and first delete this rm-r of the package lock, and then I'm just going to hit yarn to create that yarn lock file for me. Okay, so let's actually start by running this application. So as soon as this is done, we're going to run the application. Let's see the command in order to run the application. So our package JSON is very clean. We have these few scripts. We have the development script, the build script, the start script, and the lint script. So they already have linting set up. You can configure it from here. They're already extending just the basic Next.js linting rules. Okay, so this is our script that we're going to use, is the develop, or the yarn dev, and then we're going to have the ability to run next server development script. Okay, so is this done? Not yet. Okay, so I'll get back to you once this is done. Okay, so that is done. So let's actually go ahead and run yarn dev, and we can see we are running the next dev command, and let's go ahead and open up this in our browser. Okay, so now that our server has started up, if we navigate to our browser and we visit localhost 3000, we can see the default Next website. So this is the boilerplate that they have given to us. So if we go into the pages folder, into the index.js folder, and we actually go ahead and remove everything in this main. So we're going to remove all of these divs. And we're just going to add in here a H1 that says hello world. And let's save that and go back. And we can see hello world is being printed here. So we're going to actually clear out this page completely. So let's actually clear it out all like this. And then I'm going to start from scratch using Material UI to build out our website. So let's actually go ahead and start installing Material UI and its dependencies into our Next.js application and start building our first page from here. Okay, so let's actually look at Material UI's documentation. So they have a very nice website. We can see a lot of people are in support of Trust Material UI. So it's a great component library. We have all of these nice types of components that we can choose from, different layout buttons, sliders, all of these cool, nice looking things. So let's actually dive into the setup. We can go into Material UI Core and then just Material UI. And it jumps to the nice documentation, which is very easy to consume. We have all of our sections here. I would suggest just spending a day or two, and just reading through the docs. Don't try and understand everything, but especially the getting started and the customizations and how-to guides. They're all just something that you might remember that you can do these things as you go, because Material UI is pretty customizable. It's actually crazy. Okay, so let's actually get to the installation part. So I'm using Yarn, so default installation. I'm just gonna grab the scripts that I need, read through this page, but first we're gonna use the script over here. So we're installing Material UI, the package, and then we're using Emotion, React and Emotion style. So Emotion, you can also read up more about it. So Material UI uses Emotion by default as its styling engine. So we have different types of ways of styling in React. We have our module CSS, we have our normal CSS with like BEM convention or something. And then we have styled components. You can see that's actually another option we can use is styled components. But Material UI has chosen to go with Emotion. So this is all the stuff that we're installing first. So let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to actually stop this application. And then I'm going to run the script where I install Material UI, Emotion React, and Emotion Style. So I recommend going to the website, looking at Style Emotion, seeing what it is. I'm not going to go into what it is, but it allows you to pretty much write styles, CSS rules like Sass and stuff like that inside of your JavaScript. So it's pretty cool. And writing styles like this with Next.js and Material UI is actually pretty nice. You can make very nice looking websites. Okay, so once this is done, we can install the next stuff. So let's take a look at what's next. This is if you're using style components, then you use this script. So the only difference is we're installing the style components engine and the style components package instead of the Emotion. So the next part we need, okay, this is important. React is a pure dependency to the Material UI library. So we need these versions of React and React DOM, which we already have with Next. I think Next is also having this as pure dependency. So let's actually install the font that Material UI uses. So by default, Material UI uses or needs the Roboto font. So we can install that using the font source package. So let's actually do that now. So this is done. So we can run yarn add font source. This should be quick. It's just installing a quick font. And then we need to add our imports for this font so that Material UI can actually use it in our application. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to copy all of this. And where do we paste this? Well, it's telling us then you can import this at the entry point of your project. So our entry point, as we know now, is either our index or our underscore app. So we can see our global styles is already being imported from here. So let's, at the top, add these font imports. So I'm going to save this. And now we should be done with setting up the font and installing the font. Okay. So read up more about it. Material UI uses these weights by default. We can add the font with a CDN link in the header tag. And if we want to use this, we're going to have to add it in the underscore document, and we need to add it in the head tag over here. So this is why we have these two types of entry points or documents to configure these type of things. Okay, so we can add icons. So with Material UI, we use icons, and they have a very nice library of icons. So we can actually add their icon library as well. So instead of using something like Font Awesome, we just use Material UI's icons, which is a very, very rich icon library, and go from there. We can also add it with a CDN link if you'd like to. And that is the end of setting up Material UI. It's pretty quick. We had this installation over here, then we had the Roboto font installation, and then we had the icons installation. So now we have Material UI set up in our application. Let's actually build out our page first. So I'm going to use a snippet, and this will create us our basic home page functional component. So if you want to know how I did this snippet shortcut, I'm using an extension called React Snippets. So it's called ES7 React Snippets, I believe. Let's see what we get. React, yeah, this one. You can see it's installed. ES7 plus React Redux, React Native Snippets. Highly recommend this, speeding up the creation of new components, or in this case, pages. Okay, so from here, let's actually start using Material UI. So if you want to import the most basic element from Material UI, this would be a box. And this would be considered a div. So here we can see we're using an HTML div. But when we use Material UI, you can mix it with HTML, your normal HTML tags. But it's preferred to use only Material UI straight through, so that it makes it easy to understand and customize when using Material UI themes and breakpoints and stuff like that. Okay, so by default, we can see it renders as a div anyways. So let's go ahead and replace this div with a Material UI box. If we save this, we can see we've removed the React import. And that's only due to my Visual Studio Code setup. It removes any unused or unnecessary imports. So if we were to save this and now run our application, yarn dev, to start up our development server again and head over onto the browser. Once we head back onto the website, we now see this black page rendering our home page. So let's actually inspect the elements, and we can see that home page is wrapped inside of a div with a class of MUI box-root. So if we actually take a look at the Material UI documentation, and I were to navigate over to the components and then view the box component, so we can see we have a lot of components. Under layout, we have box, and here we can inspect all of the documentation about the box and how it works. And here we can view the APIs, which are pretty important, because if I click on the APIs, I can scroll down and view some more information. So we can see what type of component it can render. So we can set what HTML element it should render. And then we have this SX, which is the style prop capability in Material UI for all its components. So this is pretty neat. We'll see how to use this as well. Okay, so we can see everything we need about the box right from here. And for all of the components, it's the same way. We have the components, and then we have the components API. So if you want to know more about the props that this component accepts, for example, here, we can view and how to style it. We can read about it here as well. Most of it is styled the same way, and it's pretty intuitive if you first click it. So yeah, let's start building out our page. So we actually don't want any of this dark background. So let's go ahead and remove all of our global styles. So I'm just going to remove all of this, and I'm going to set a few basic ones. So on the body and on the object, we want the margin of default to be removed. So we can actually just do this, or we can set it to the HTML and the body. All default margins should be 0, and the background should be white now. Okay, so now we're on this point. So let's actually go ahead and start building our page. So our page is going to consist of a few Material UI components. First, we're going to need some app bar. We're going to need some nav bar. So let's call this component a nav bar. And then we're going to have our main page container. So the main page container kind of centers things, and it doesn't let things spread out all the way to the sides of the browser. So it's giving some sort of a container based on some breakpoints and widths that we'll check out. But we're going to need that container, and then within this container, we're going to then have our home page being rendered. We're not going to have any footer or anything at the bottom, but this is going to be our about page. In our demo, we remembered we had another page where we had about us. It was a very simple page. So let's actually go ahead and create that. So how would I create a new page in Next.js? Well, in the pages directory, I would create either a new file and call this file the name of the page /js, or what I can do is I can create a folder with the name of about, and then inside of this folder, I create a new file with index.js. So now it's going to take whatever this file, whatever this folder name is going to be the page route. So we've just created a /about page route. And then in this index.js file, we can actually create our page. So here we can create the about page, again, using our snippets. Now we have an about page, and let's actually go ahead and remove, again, this div from just normal React JSX, and we're going to use the Material UI box element, box component. So we render in the box component here and save. Once again, it just removes the React import, and now we have an about page. So let's actually first save this again as home page, and then we go back to the about page, and in here we just have about page. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this now. So everything is saved. Let's go back to our browser. Let's just hit a refresh on everything. And here we can see we're at the home page. So I'm just going to zoom in here. We're at the home page. And if I go to the browser route /about and I hit enter, we can see we get navigated to the about page. So navigating back and forth between the home and the about page works as follows. Okay, so let's zoom back out there and let's start building on the home page. So we've started designing out the components that we need. So let's actually go ahead and do that. We're going to need an app bar. So let's actually use Material UI's app bar that it provides to us from the beginning. So I'm going to use Material UI documentation, and under components, I'm going to go to app bar. So go through all of these components so that you know what you have to work with when it comes to Material UI, and pretty soon you're going to realize that you have everything that you actually need. So here's examples of the app bar. I'm just going to go for this basic type of look. So I'm going to look at the code example, and I'm going to grab everything that they have for the app bar. So in the app bar, we can see that piece of code here. We can see they have an app bar. Then they have a toolbar with inside of it, and then they have some icon button, which is this menu, which I'm not seeing here. I'm guessing this only gets rendered on small screens. Okay, and then we have the MUI typography. Then we have a box with items. So these are the links that we're adding in. So the main thing we can see is Material UI is built up of a load of other components, right? So in order to get this look and the design of this component examples, you can see they've combined multiple parts of Material UI. We have a box, and we've given it a style property with this SX, and then we give it a flex grow of 1. So it's taking up the entire width of that page. And then inside of the box, we've added in an app bar with a position of static, and inside of the app bar, we have a toolbar. So is it necessary to group things like this? No. So this is where we experiment. Okay, we only need the app bar because we need this nav bar looking component. So let's actually just import the nav bar from the app bar. So I'm going to use app bar from Material UI. It's going to get imported at the top. And in here, I'm just going to add my basic title and a list of buttons that I can navigate to, or pages. So in order to add text in Material UI, we use the typography component. And in here, I'm just going to say post.net. So .net, just like this. Okay. And then I'm going to add in a few buttons. So I want a list of buttons because it's going to be based off of our navigation. So in Material UI, we have a component called list. And I'm not going to go through all the components that I'm using. This is where you use the documentation to understand what it is it gives to you. But if you think about it, right, typography, it's any title or text or paragraph or span or H1 that you have in your website. Instead, now you're using Material UI's typography, which gives you a load of other benefits as well, like scaling the fonts across your app, changing the font sizes with different mobile positions, having consistency of your titles and stuff across your entire theme of your app. It becomes very easy. So just grasping the concept of moving away from just, a span and then adding styles or paragraph tag or H1 and adding styles. We actually use what Material UI gives for us out of the box. So we have our typography, and our typography has different variances. So we can see we have a few variances here. We have subtitles of different versions. We have an overline. We have different heading versions, like we have our HTML tags. We have a body 1, a body 2, button, caption. So we can use these variants to structure our app in a very consistent manner. And we can style or customize each one of these variants. I'll get to that in a later stage where we customize the theme object. But then we have the ability to customize these values across all of the app very, very easy. So let's make it an H1. So it's going to be very big. And now we need this list imported from Material UI. And then in the list, we want to loop through an array of our menu items. So what menu items do we want? So we're going to have a menu items array. And this array pretty much just contains a few objects. We'll have a title, and this will be the home page. And it will go to a specific link. And it would be the / link. And let's create one for the About Us page as well. So we have here About page, and this would just go to the /about. So we're going to take these menu items array with these objects, and we're going to loop through them in order to create our menus. So we have our item, and we want to return for each item in our menu array, we want to return a list item button from Material UI. So list item button from Material UI. Also a very nice looking component, but it's going to give us this list look, and all of the buttons are going to be the same. So we want to actually navigate or give it the name inside of the button. So the item.title, and then we're going to link to a specific place. So I believe it has an href property, and then we can link it to the item.link. Just like this. And we need a key, because obviously in React, when we map, we need a key for each specific component. And we're just going to give it the item.title as the key. Okay, and if we save this now and go back to our website, we should see this being logged out. So we can see we have this list item, we have this huge title of post.net, we have this blue background that stretches the entire page. So you can see as we go, it stretches the entire page. And if we hover over it and inspect it, we now have this box. Then we have this header. And this header is the component that we've rendered. If we take a look, it's the MUI app bar root. So from here inside, we have an H1 because we have the variant of H1, and then the title. Then we have a UL. So it takes our Material UI list and turns it into an unordered list in the HTML part. So that's pretty neat, and it's giving the correct semantic tags on each of the elements. So then we have this list of A tags, which is our links or our buttons that we've added. So if we take a look at the code, we have our list, and inside of our list, we're rendering out these buttons, and both of them are from our menu list. So now if I click on About, it actually takes me to / the About page. But you can see it's doing a weird refresh reload thing, which is not what we want with Next.js, right? We want to combine our server-side logic and our client-side logic with React and give us a nice and optimized user experience. So in order to do this, we need to use the next link component. So with the Next.js routing, because we're using this page routing, we also need to use Next.js in order to link us or route us through the app to make it feel and look like a single page application. So we're going to need to import from next link this link component. So at the top we can see we've imported this link component, and this link component needs an href. So let's just take the href from down here. So we're no longer using the href down here, and we're just placing the href at the top. And the same for the key, because this is not our parent component anymore. We need to add it to the parent. So if we save this and go back, everything should still look the same on the home page. So there we spotted another issue. We can't see the nav bar on the About Us page. So if we actually link to the About Us page now, we can see that jump is instantaneous and we don't have any flashing of reloads happening. So we can see it's all happening instantaneously like a single page application. And this is due to this link component that we're using from Next. So this is the wrapper that Next.js is around our React apps. It's giving us this routing and this new link component that helps us link to different pages. Okay, so this is the combination of Material UI and Next.js so far. So let's actually move this app bar that we're seeing to be able to be accessible across all pages, because we're going to have to be able to navigate to all pages from our app bar. So where do we do this? Well, we can do this in the _app directory, because as I mentioned previously, this is the entry point to all our pages. So you can see it's actually spreading the page props to this component. So let's actually cut this out quickly and add in some braces. And then I'm going to wrap this with a fragment. And in here, I'm going to add my page component back. But what we don't want to wrap it just with some fragments, empty fragments. We now want to wrap it with, or add in at the top here, we want to add in our app bar that we've created over here. So let's copy all of this. I'm going to copy all of this and paste it up in here. And now we're going to need to bring in all of these imports from Material UI as well. So let's quickly do that. Bring in that import. And this is the list from Material UI and the link from Next. And then the list item button from Material UI. So all of these things are imported now. And if we go back here and just add in here a typography, let's say home page, and this will be a variant of H1. Let's save all of that. Let's cut our menu items, save this again, go here, paste in our menu items because this loop requires it now, and we can save it. This should all be fine. Let's check our console. All is good. Let's go back. And everything still looks fine. So now we can see on the About page, we actually see the nav bar as well. So if I go to the home page, we now have this nav bar across our entire app because we're sharing it as a layout in our _app. So this is the idea behind it, right? We're adding it to all of our pages when you add it to the app _app directory or _app file. Okay, so now we have this added, but I want to add it as its own component because adding it in here doesn't look very nice. So I want a basic component. Let's just call it navbar. I want to call it as navbar, and I want to just take all of this away, and it should be rendered just like this. So let's go ahead and create that component. In our root of our project, we create a new folder called components, same as in React, and here we can create our different components. So I'm just going to create a navbar.js component, which is going to take in our shortcut again. And I'm just going to paste in all the JSX for the navbar. Paste it in here. Remove this. Okay. Now we can see we need to import all of these again. So let's just copy it from here. All of this we're going to copy. And we're going to add it at the top as an import. Okay, and then we need to take this menu items as well and bring it up here. Okay, so now we have our navbar component being fine, and we need to import it in the underscore app. So from add components, navbar, so we have this alias already set up, and for the styles you can see the alias is already set up. And this is all just because of this next config, or not the next config, in the JS config, we are adding alias paths to everything from the root directory of our project. So we can, if we have very nested, we can add different aliases there, but yeah, so it's importing, we can have it like this as well, just coming from the root directory and importing it. So from here, it's the components slash navbar. Okay, or we can just use the @ which kind of gives us that alias way of importing. If we go back now, we still see our navbar everywhere, and it's now separated in a nice component. So now we've seen a little bit of Material UI in action with Next.js, and we've built in some routing between pages and created a component that is used across all of our pages, which is the navbar. We've moved that into its own component, and here we're using a few Material UI components with the text and as well with the link of Next.js and the list from Material UI. So let's make this a smaller size. Let's actually make this a H6 and save and go back. This should become a lot smaller. Okay. Now we can display this in some flex box. So we want this to be flex direction. So for that, we can either use a normal div and then add a style to it, and style property display of flex. You know, we can do this all fine, adding it in like this and save, and now all should be next to each other. Okay, so that's fine, we can do that. But we don't want to use a div, we want to use a box. And we want to use a box from Material UI, so let's just import that as well. Okay, and we don't add a style property like this. We can, because it will just spread it to the underlying HTML div, but we want to use Material UI's SX property, because this gives us a lot of cool styling ability where we can connect to the Material UI theme, we can do some nice sass, and it's just very clean. So this is a concept to learn in Material UI. It's one of the styling customizations is using the SX property, and all of the components of Material UI has access to this SX property. As you can see, the typography, the list. Anyway, so let's continue. So we have this display of flex in the box, so this should be the same, nothing should change. But we want all of the elements to be displayed justify content. So we can say justify the content, and we're using this camel case, justify the content. Is this the camel case? I think so, I'm not even sure. Yeah, it's camel case. And then we use justify content, and we're going to use the space between. And we can save this now and go back, and we can see it's pushed the links all the way over here. So these are now only these small buttons because there is this big gap across. So we can see it with the DevTools nicely. Okay, so we can see that our nav bar is also kind of overlaid across our page. So our page is still beneath. So here is our page, it's the box root, and it's kind of over. So by default, the app bar has a position of fixed, I believe. So we can set the position property, and there are different positions. We can check out, does it say it's fallback to static. So we want it to be relative. Let's change it, let's save, and we can see it now pushes it back. So now if I were to scroll down, it's going to stay at the top because it's relative to our app. So the positioning here is relative, and we can make it sticky. We can make it scroll. There's a few properties. I like the position fixed, and this will again move it at the bottom. But now whenever I scroll, so let's give this page a big size. So let's go back to this box, and we're going to give it an SX property, and I'm going to give it a height of, let's say, 200 V8. So these are all the same properties you would use in a normal CSS. It's the same thing. We're just kind of combining it with Material UI, and we're going to have some nice sass and emotion-based style. Let's go back and view this now. Now we see we have the scroll bar, and the header is actually sticking or staying fixed at the top as follows. So if I were to change this to be, let's say, relative again, and save, and go back. Now if I scroll, you can see the header doesn't come with me, which sometimes might be the situation you want. So they are different, so play around. Let's remove it completely and see what functionality we get. If we save and we scroll, it's kind of in the fixed static position by default. So if we were to change this to, let's say, position, and we can specify sticky, then there's probably some other, so you can see it's sticky. It's not sticky for the first part. As we scroll, so we don't have that overlay. So it's kind of giving us the situation that I would like, is that it pushes the page down where it's not adding, it's only becoming relative from the sticky point after it's scrolled past the page. I don't know if that makes sense, but you pretty much just play around with these components, right? You have some fun. It's like Legos. You play around what works, what doesn't. So you don't need to follow the same example that they're giving here. Sometimes it's nice to just copy what they have, paste it in, and start, prototyping quickly from there. So again, just playing around and understanding what each of these components does makes it a lot easier. So okay, so let's start cleaning this up a bit. So these are not aligned properly within our app bar. So in our box here, I'm guessing. So we need to align the items. Align items in the center. Okay, and now they are aligned more in the center. Okay, but now we have this box, right, with all of these properties. But there's a component in Material UI that kind of has this set up by default already. And that's what they're using over here, which is our toolbar. And if we take a look at the toolbar component in Material UI, we can read about it has some default stuff set up already for us. Okay, so here we can read up everything we want, see the CSS that we can style from it. And yeah, so let's actually use, oh, I shouldn't have closed that now. So let's actually use the toolbar instead of this box. So I'm going to use the toolbar from Material UI and save this, and let's see what we get now. Now we can see it's centered. We have some padding on the sides. It's giving us a nice looking, basic setup already. And in order for me to push these two components out, by default, the toolbar already comes with a position of flex, so we can inspect it actually. And I would recommend doing this. Play around with your DevTools. Here we can inspect the toolbar, and we can see that its display is already set to flex. So we can see the display position is added to flex here. So we have some fallbacks here as well, multiple fallbacks, and there we can see the position flex. So once again, Material UI, you can see it adds a lot of CSS, but this CSS is due to browser compatibility, across Safari and all of these, compatibility issues from mobile. Material UI underneath takes care of all of that. So we kind of just need to understand what we're doing and then combine it with Material UI's framework, if you consider it, or library setup with how to use it. And most other component libraries follow the same strategy as Material UI. So learning Material UI is just going to be beneficial to learning any other component library. Okay, so now we have this. We want to display it as flex. So we can use the SX property again, and we want to justify the content to be space between. so that we get that same look that we had previously. Let's space between that. And now the menus are all the way over here. And we want to display flex of each of these menu items as well. So we can, on the list, we can just say display of flex, and the flex direction should default to row. And if we save this and go back, they should be flexed now. And now we have a nav bar with menus. And if I navigate to the about page, it's navigating accordingly. So let's add that to the about page. Also, let's just add this within a typography. Grab that, move it to the end. Okay, and this will also be a variant of H1, make it a nice big title. If we go back, we're on the About Us page, and we're on the home page. Okay, so there we have Material UI getting started in our application, right? You should be starting to see what direction we are heading in with using Material UI. It's pretty easy, and as you go, it's becoming a lot more helpful than you might think. So another thing we need to look at with Material UI is actually giving it some theme. So with Material UI, we have this concept of a theme which we can wrap our entire app with. And we can style this theme with many different properties, from the typography to the positioning to the box shadows to even individual components within Material UI. So in the Material UI docs, if we hit the Control K to activate the search up here, let's search for default theme. And we can explore this default theme. And here it is. We see the default theme, and it is this huge object. If we expand all, we can see there's multiple properties with colors and RGB values and border radiuses and transforms. And here you can see like shortcuts to padding top, padding right, bottom. We have all of these shorthands that we can use or add. We can add our own, we can extend from there, right? We can add our own type of setup as we want. So these are all under the different properties of this object. So we're going to start, let me just collapse all of it quickly. And we're going to start exploring some of these properties with the theme, just showing how insane Material UI can be styled. Okay, so let's go ahead with the palette. That's the most important one for now. And we have our primary color, secondary color, error, warning. You might be wondering, why is this navbar blue? Well, it's because the default primary color is that blue. It's that main primary color over here. And if we were to change that, everything in Material UI would adapt to whatever is using the primary color. So you can go and specify which components use the primary color. Some of the components have a default already set up. For example, the app bar already by default has the primary color. So we can change that. We can go to the nav bar and the app bar, and we can change the color property on here to be equal to any of the other colors. So we have default, inherit, primary, secondary, transparent. So these are some of the properties that you can have. Let's try transparent, and it's just going to be white and a white background because it has the background of the page, which is white, and it has like this box shadow for you to see the nav bar a little bit. So it has this functionality with the app bar as well, which you don't have to style yourself. You have the ability to override that with any time you want. So that's very nice. And we can see that the text actually adjusted to the color of the background automatically. So if I were to change this back, let's say to primary, which it is by default, we can see that the text actually turns white because it has this whole theming setup with Material UI done by default. Okay, so in order for us to customize this theme, let's say we want to change how the primary color looks, how the secondary color looks. We want to customize we have the ability to customize everything on this object, right? And there are many things. So just under the palette, we can see a lot of things. We have different modes, light mode, dark mode. That's very powerful in apps, light mode, dark mode. You can switch and toggle the colors very easily. We have warning, secondary, error, info, success, gray colors. Here we have a lot of different gray shades we can use. We have contrasting thresholds. And the greatest thing about Material UI is if we customize the theme, right? So let's actually go ahead and do that. How do we do this? Well, we use the theme provider also from Material UI, and we're going to wrap our entire app with that context provider. So let's actually go ahead and import from material at again, so at the material package, we're going to import the theme provider. This is a context wrapper, so we can actually inspect everything. We can go into it and inspect actually what it is, but we can see this component makes the theme available down the React tree. It should preferably be used at the root of your component tree, which we are doing, right? We are adding it to the root of our project, and we can add it in here and save. Okay, so we've wrapped our application now with this theme provider, right? But this theme provider needs a prop. So we're not seeing that warning yet, but if we save it and go back, we can see our app would actually crash, cannot read property material, or cannot read property undefined. And it's somewhere in our add material styles provider. You can see the errors coming from here. Let's see if we can see another error being logged. Here we see a few errors. We can see the error occurred in the theme provider. We can view a lot of them. And this pretty much just means here, failed prop type. The prop theme is marked as required in the theme provider. So this is our error that we're looking for. And we need to provide the theme property. So on this theme, we need to provide this theme property. Like, this is important because Material UI then shakes or gives this theme that we're structuring to the rest of our application. So how do we get this theme? What is this theme actually? Well, it is of type theme, of default theme, and we can get a default theme by using the create theme function from Material UI. So also from Material UI, we can import the create theme function, and pretty much all this theme does is it gives us back a theme. So we can see it gives us a type theme back, and we can provide this theme in here. But here we can also customize this theme. So we can provide an object, and inside of this object, we can see all the properties we saw from the website of this theme, and we can start customizing it. So by default, if we just leave it like this, everything should work again. We can navigate, we see the theme blue being loaded and the fonts. But now let's go ahead and change the primary color. So I'm going to change the palette value, and I'm going to change the primary color on the palette value, and I'm going to change the main property of the primary color. And the nice thing to note, if we go back and view, we can see the primary has a lot of different types. We have main, light, and dark. So we have different variances and a contrasting color to our main color. And all three of these get set up by default by Material UI. All we need to do is specify our main color. So I'm going to create a new main color, and let's get some, let's just use red. I'm just going to use a very basic hex color here, and let's just use red. And if I go back, everything that was the primary color is now red, which is pretty cool, right? And if I go to view the secondary color, we can see it's this purple. So if I were to change the nav bar to the color of secondary, then it should be that purple. Then we can see it updates to the purple. So this is very, very useful. Now we kind of understand how to use Material UI's theme across the app. And now let's actually go ahead and start building out the application completely. So I'm not going to focus too much on Material UI now. You kind of get the idea how to move yourself around using it. And for the rest of the application, I'm just going to go ahead and build it. And if there are components that you might not understand, just go ahead and look up the documentation, search for that component, and you should be all good. So let's actually start doing that next. Okay, so let's actually start building out the rest. So I'm going to keep it the default blue for now. We'll create a custom theme later. I'll show you how to style specific components and the typography and stuff like that. So let's get to our code base. Okay, so from here, I'm just going to remove the color, keep it to its default. And then here, I'm just going to remove any settings. So we just create the default theme. And now everything should be blue again. Okay, cool. So let's go to the home screen. And what I want to have on the home screen is some container. And then we want a button on one part of the screen. And on a portion of the other part of the screen, we want like a feed where we can scroll. So let's go ahead and build that setup. So with Material UI, we can get a container in the middle by using the container from Material UI. So it's called container, and the container is connected to multiple breakpoints. So instead of using a box here, we can actually just use the container. But we also might want some screen background, so we can actually keep the box there and give the box background, let's give it a height, let's give it a default height. The entire screen width, oh, the entire screen height, sorry. And then we want to give it a background color of something in our palette. Let's say we want to give it a color within our theme palette. Because we're using the SX from Material UI, inside of here, we have access to, we can write it as follow. We can write this as a function. The SX property can be a function that returns an object. And in this function, we can then destructure the theme. So how cool is this, right? So now we can use the theme to specify a color. So we can say theme.palette. Is it like this? Well, now can say theme. Yeah, theme. So it's not destructuring, it's just as an argument. And then we can say theme.palette. And then we can go into the grays. You know, there's a gray. And then there's multiple grays. We can choose 100, 400, 300. So let's go to 300 and save that. And now if we go back, we should see the background is gray. We have like this little bit of an overflow because of the 100 VH. So our nav bar's height and our page height is being calculated. So this difference of the scroll is the padding and the size of the heading. You can see the size of the heading is almost the size of the scroll bar. Okay, so we can actually, if we comment that out, it shouldn't stretch all the way. So we're going to see like this weird kind of setup. We want the entire background to be that color. So we can set the minimum height to be equal to 100 VH. Let's actually, okay, cool. So here we set the background, we've set the height, and we have our content aligned with some container. So we can see if we give this container a border, we can see what it's doing. So I'm just going to give it a solid red border. So here we can see that the container is margined in the center of the page, but it doesn't stretch beyond a certain width. And we can customize that width. We can specify the max width prop. And this max width prop, if we would hover over it, we can see it determines the maximum width of the container. So by default, it's set to large. Now, what does large mean? What is the actual pixel value of large? Well, with material theme, so if we look at the theme, so let's actually use the theme from here. I'm just going to use it to look into the theme. So we can say the theme, let's specify a value as being width, and then we can say theme.breakpoints. So we have this property breakpoints within our theme, and then we have multiple values. So if I were to actually hover over this, we can see we have an extra small value, a small value, a medium value, a large value, or LG, and an extra large. So these are the breakpoints, and each one of these values have their own specified like property, which is a number in pixels. So we can actually use that all across the app with different types of responsive properties on Material UI. So we can use that to make our apps responsive. If we want to set the border color only on small screens, we can add another object where we just add SM for small, and now all that it's going to do is it's going to set the border only on small screens. So we shouldn't actually see that border now. If we were to save and go back, the border should be from small screens and up. So this is what this means. And with the grid system and the the breakpoint system, it's always with the media query where it's from this value and up. Okay, so from small and up, it's only going to show so if I make it extra large, so if I'm on an extra large screen, I should only show the border. Then I don't see the border because I'm not on an extra large screen. If I close this, however, my screen size is actually at that breakpoint, and now we see that border color. So that's also a very nice thing we can do with this SX prop and Material UI. So let's actually remove this container style, and we want the max width to be at a breakpoint in Material UI of large screens, which it is by default. So let's say we want to make it even smaller. We want to be the max width of medium. And medium, I know from working with Material UI, is 900 pixels. So with 900 pixels as the max width. So if we go back, you can see it's squished it all the way in now. So now we can actually start building within this container our form. So we wanted on one piece of the screen, like let's say this entire container, we're going to take this container and like 1/3 of the container should be the button and 2/3 of the rest of the container should be the feed that we can scroll. So how would we get something like this? Well, in normal CSS, we'll probably use the grid and display the columns, set the columns of the grid. You know, all the CSS properties required for that. With Material UI, we can just use the grid component. And the grid component is one component, but it can be used for multiple layers within a grid. So it can be used as a container of a grid, or it can be used as an item within a grid container. So we can specify a grid, and then within the grid, we can have grid items. But we need to tell which one of these are the container grid. So this will be the container grid. So we're going to add the property container, and this will be an item grid. So we're going to add in the property item. So now let's just spell grid correctly here. So now Material UI knows that this is the first grid and this is the item. And there's different properties with breakpoints we can specify on these grids. So let's actually go and do a basic grid setup. I'm just going to create a box in here so we can see something. I'm going to give this box 100 pixels height, and let's say it should take the full entire width. Okay, so we have that box here, and we're going to make another item, and we actually want both of them to have a border. So let's add in a border property of 1 pixel solid red. Okay, so now we have these grid items, but each one of these grid items needs to know how much space it needs to fill within the container. So the container works with 12 grids, 12 columns. So we can specify on a small screen breakpoint how many columns should this item take. So let's say on an extra small screen, so this is on mobile devices, I want this column to take up all 12 of the positions in the container. And on a medium screen, I want this to take up only 1/3 of the container. And what would that be if there's 12 columns? It would be 4/12. So it would be 4 of the 12 columns it needs to take position of. So let's copy these breakpoints and add it to the other grid item. And on a small phone, we also want it to be as taking the full container width. And then on the small screens, we want it to take the remaining of the 12 from here. So on a medium, we're already taking 4 here, so we have 8 left. So we're going to take the rest of the 8 here. So if I specify this and save, and let's go back, we can see we have this kind of a grid layout already. So we have this column and then this part, and this is exactly what we want. And the nice thing now is if we want to specify the breakpoint as being at large, we can space it, and it equally, like responsively spaces it from there. And if I go to a small screen, you can see it dynamically drops underneath each other according to our grid system. So let's take a look at this breakpoint. So anywhere above the medium breakpoint. So here we can see by default it has 12. So anywhere from the medium breakpoint up, it should take 4 and 8. So what is the medium breakpoint? Well, if we scroll this down, we can look at the pixels value here in the corner, and we can see it's still 2 columns. When I get to 900, however, when I get to below 900, we can see it drops down. So anywhere from 900 and up, it has the medium breakpoint. Anywhere below that, it's taking on the next defined breakpoint. So the next defined breakpoint we specified is here. If I were to have specified a small breakpoint, so let's say we take up 6 columns on small, and then for this one we take up the remaining 6 columns of small, then we'll see the jump between is only in this fashion. So we have a lot of control of how we want to section our things, and now it's going to stay on this type of breakpoint for the small screens until we are below the breakpoint of small screens, which is 600. So if we go below 600, then we'll see it drops down to the extra small breakpoint. So this is pretty cool working with the grid, and we can view the breakpoints by going into our theme with Material UI, and then we can check out the breakpoints here. On the values, we can see that the extra small is from 0 pixels to 600, and small starts from 600 to 900, medium starts from 900 to 1200, and then large starts at 1200 all the way up to extra large is anywhere from 1536 pixels and onwards. So if you use these breakpoints, you can make your entire app responsive very, very easily in Material UI. So we can change these breakpoints from the theme as well, like we changed the color in the palette. So we can, if we want the small screens to be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, or the medium screens to be, the ratio between these breakpoints, we can go and configure it there. And we have these nice CSS functions that we'll get to in just a second, which makes determining when we get to certain breakpoints very easy. Okay, so that is the breakpoints. So now we have this column layout. Now instead of rendering a box within here, we want to actually bring in a button that will open a form. So let's add in a button here, and this button will also be coming from Material UI. So let's import that, Material UI. Okay, and this button will have a variant. So variant is a word that, let's check the import, it didn't get imported, so let's just import the button here. So variant, a lot of the components that have these different variants, I guess is the best way to describe it, but that has different types of itself. So the typography has a heading 1, heading 2. The button has different variances as well. So if you take a look at the docs, I know I said I'm not going to go to the docs, but it's always good to work this way. Here we have different variances of a button. We have like a text-based button, we have a contained button, or we have an outline button. So we have different variances, and multiple components in Material UI has this variance property where you can switch quickly between different styles of a button or styles of a different component. So let's take the variant of contained and let's give it a title of add note. Okay, just like this. Now we have a button here that says add note. We no longer have that box with the border, but we don't want this button all the way at the top. So let's actually give some spacing to the screen. This container that's taking this full width, we actually want to give it some spacing. So let's give it a property of SX, and let's give it a padding at the top. So there's shorthand in Material UI's SX property as well. We get some nice, almost like Tailwind CSS or Bootstrap utility CSS shorthands. So we can specify the padding in the Y direction, so at the top and at the bottom. Here you can also see it gives you the nice CSS of how it would look. And we can specify that to be of a specific size, let's say 10 pixels. Okay, so now it's going to push it down a little bit, but 10 pixels isn't really like such a great value. In Material UI, also with the theme, we have the ability to specify different, let me just navigate to the theme again. We have this spacing, and with spacing we have different values to each of the spacings. So in Material UI we can use, if we check the spacing part, we can use the value of 2 or 4, and this will be equal. So it says Material UI uses a recommended 8 pixel scaling factor by default. So 1, if you add anything to be 1, so let's say this, where would it be? We want to give padding at the top and bottom of 1, then it's going to give 8 pixels. But let's say we make it 2, then it's 16 pixels. Let's say we make it 3, then it's every time we just add 8 to this number. So it'd be 24, and so forth. So this is actually a very consistent way of using spacing in your app, and you can customize what that means as well to you. So if you want 1 to be not 8 or something else, you can also customize that within your theme. So you can see how using Material UI and its all entangled theme can make your application very scalable, because you can add and customize things very quickly as your project becomes bigger and bigger. Okay, so we're going to use, let's say, 16 pixels. Let's check it out. Yeah, that's probably good. Let's make it actually 4 pixels. So it's going to be 4 times 8. Yeah, it's a good 32 pixels spacing. Okay, I'm happy with that. But we want the button to take up the full space of its container that it is in. So we can do the following property, full width, which is just a shorthand setting the width to 100. You can add it inside of a SX prop, add the width to 100 as well. Now we can see these two are touching each other. I don't want these grid items to be touching each other. So on the grid container, I can add a property called spacing. And here I can give it 1, 2, 3, just like we add, or you can give it a string pixel value. So let's give it a value of 2. Yeah, let's give it a value of 2. Now we can see there's a gap of 16 pixels between these two items. So if I were to add another item, it would equally space or give that flex gap between each of the grid items. So there we have a little bit of spacing. This grid is taking up way too much space, so let's actually make it smaller. I'm going to remove the small one. Okay, and then I want to change this up to not be 4, but let's make it less. I want to make it 2, and then the remaining 10 for the 12. That's a little bit too little, so let's make it 3, and this would then be a 9. Yeah, this looks much better. Okay, so now we have our feed section here, and we have our button here. And once again, if we want to make this by default is large, but if we want to make it smaller, so medium, we can check it out. And it has increased to medium. So if you want to make it a large again, oops, then it will increase. We can even make it larger to the largest breakpoint, and then it will go all the way almost to the end of the screen. If I close this up, you can see it still has some container. But yeah, let's make it a medium, just to give it a small, centered look. Okay, this is good. And let's actually, instead of rendering a box here, we want to render out a post list component. So it's going to receive some notes that we made because we're adding notes. So let's just make it a post. The post, create new post, or yes, create new post. That's what the button is going to say. Okay, and then we want to add in the post list component. So I'm going to take a paper component, which is going to give us some like drop shadow card look. So with Material UI, we have this paper component, which is also like a very basic component. If I were to just give it a basic height and width, just so we can see it on the screen, width, let's say 100 pixels, and height of 100 pixels. Let's make the width full, so it's going to take the 100% of its container. So we have this paper, this nice looking paper. And inside of this paper, I now want to create like a list where we can scroll like a feed almost. So I want this not to be only 100 pixels height, but I want it to take up a good portion of the screen. So let's make this height 100%. Let's see how much it stretches. Okay, so it's only taking 100% of its container, which is this grid item. But this grid item, we want it to stretch all the way to a certain point. So we can either make the paper stretch the grid item, or we can set some height on the grid item. So let's specify a height here of, let's say, 800 pixels or 600 pixels. and it should stretch it all the way. So now it's 600 pixels just for that grid container, and this is taking 100% of its height. So let's actually make this grid container take 100% of its height. Maybe it stretches all the way down. Now it's disappeared completely. Because this container, let's add a border around this container just to see where it's at. Okay, so it's not stretching any, it's not giving any height. So let's make this have a height as well of 100%. Okay, so this one is probably inside of this box, which is, it should stretch. This should stretch all the way. Let's see why it's not. So the minimum width, let's give this a border as well, so we can check it out. Okay, so this border is stretching all the way. Our container, so let's just stretch, let's just make this item stretch the container, so we don't have to backspace all the way up like this. I think it's better anyway. Okay, so let's remove all of this like so, and let's give it a set height of, this is taking 100 VH, so let's take this to be 80 VH. So that, I feel like that's a good enough height. This is not a CSS tutorial, so you can style this obviously to fit your situation or your screen height in a more like dynamic manner. But from in here, I want it to be able to scroll. So this height is going to be, anything that overflows this height is going to be scrolled. Okay. And now within this paper, I want to render out my posts. So let's actually make a dummy array of posts quickly. So I'm going to say posts. And if we remember how our posts look like from our API database, it looks like this. We have an ID, which would be some number. Then we have a title, which should just be some title, random title. And then I think it was body. So we have some body text. And this would be some dummy body text. So this is one post. So let's go ahead and create a few. I'm just going to create, let's say 4 dummy posts. Okay. So here we have some posts. I'm going to take this posts array and I'm going to loop through it in here. So this item, if the posts array were to be 0, so let's say posts.length is equal to 0, then only we want to render out a typography component that just pretty much has a text that says no posts found. And this can have a variant of, let's just say, an H6 to give it a bold type of look. Do we have typography imported? We do. Okay, so if there were to be actual posts, so let's say there is posts, then I want to map through each of the posts and I want to render out a card that contains this post. So let's create a card. I'm just going to create a box for now again, a very basic box that has some border. Let's give it a 1 pixel solid black for now. And then in here, we're going to have the post title, and the post body rendered in text. So we can save that. This box will need a key. We can just give it the post ID as the key. And this should all work. Let's check it out. Okay. So let's just reload everything, make sure we have no errors. Okay, so we now see these posts being logged out. They don't look very nice, so let's actually go ahead and make them look better. So we want a button to edit and delete them, and we want to see the created at date. So there would be another field that comes along here called created, I think it's created at, and then this would probably be just some sort of string that we can use. So I'm gonna add this in everywhere. Okay. And now we want a button in here as well. So we want a button, and this button needs to say edit, and another button needs to say delete. Caps lock on. Okay, so the edit button should be the main focused one, so we can give it a variant of contained, or the call to action one. We don't want to call to action the delete as much, so we can give it an outline variant. This will both be of different color, so let's keep that one the primary color, but the delete one, we want this to be a color of error. So we have a color palette scheme of error, so across the app, when we have this color, we can use the color in our palette. So here we can see it looking like this now, which is looking a little bit better. Let's just add in the created at date, created at. There we can see it nicely. Okay, so now we want to add some padding. So let's add padding all around. So just adding P means padding all around, and we want to give it a spacing of 16 pixels. So we have some padding of 16 pixels, and you want to give some spacing between each of the elements within this box. So there's different ways of doing this. So let's actually, we can specify underneath the text. It has a property called gutter bottom, which pretty much just gives it some spacing beneath. It just pushes everything down a little bit. For now, this is fine, not having to go in too much detail. And let's give these buttons some spacing. So I'm going to give it a margin to the right of, let's also say 16 pixels. So it's pushing it out by 16 pixels. Or let's just give it to 1 pixels. That's probably, yeah, this is better. Okay, cool. So now we have this loaded. Let's actually add more posts quickly. Just adding some dummy posts. I don't want a breakpoint. Let's just get it to scroll. So I'm going to make this 5, 7. Okay, so that's just complaining about that key. Let's reload. Okay, so now we can see it scrolls our posts in our feed, which is nice. This is exactly what we want. So let's remove the black border. I don't like that much. So let's actually go ahead and do that. We're going to start refactoring this into proper components in just a second. We want this to be of gray, let's say 300. So now we can connect to the theme colors. It doesn't look like it connected that way. So we're going to have to use the functional approach to the SX styling. So we get the theme within this function. And now we can add in this as a string literal. And we can specify theme.palette. Let's check it out, grays, and we want the 200. Let's just add it. Cool. Now we see this gray border. This is a little bit better, but now I want some spacing, but like I want to be able to see within this feed a little bit. So I want some spacing within the feed. So within this paper, I want some padding. Let's just give it a 16 or 8 pixel padding. Yeah, that 8 pixel works. And now I want to give it some padding at the bottom. So each box needs padding or margin at the bottom of, let's also say, just 8 pixels, just pushing it down a little bit. Okay, so now we can see all the boxes being rendered out nicely. So this is our feed and our components done. Let's actually start working on the modals that's needed to open up all of these different situations. So when we create a new post, we want a modal to open. And in that modal, we want a field to create a new post and a button. And once we submit it, it should add the post to our posts array. And when we delete it, it should remove, and edit, it should update it. So let's actually, now that we've set up the material UI and the website until now, let's continue on to doing the modal setup. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and add the modals. So in material UI, let's get back to the docs here. I'm going to use this, I think it's the dialogue modal. So a simple dialogue that opens up like this. You can add anything within the dialogue, so you can see people adding different types of stuff. We can add transitions to the dialogue. Here we have like a form inside of the dialogue. Here we have some save changes. It has a header and a footer ability. Then we have full screen dialogues, which is like good for mobile. Then we have optional sizes, so we have different widths and heights that it can stretch. So this is very, very customizable and nice. We have one that opens up like this, but when it's on a phone, it opens up on a different, when it's below a certain breakpoint, we can open up different modals. So we're going to use this dialog component, so we can read up about the dialog. It's a type modal, and it has a lot of cool functionalities we can build up from. Okay, so let's go ahead and use this dialog component. So let's actually go ahead and start refactoring this a bit. So instead of loading out the paper just like this, what we want is a component that takes in the list. So I'm going to create a post list.js and RAFCE, quickly create a functional component. And this will pretty much then give this paper and everything within it. So let's paste that in here. So I'm just going to give it a save. And then I'm going to start importing all of these things from Material UI. I want the typography, I want the box component, and I want the button component. Okay, so there we have all the styles carried over. And this should receive some props. So we're going to get some props, and these props will then be able to destructure, and here we're going to get posts. Let's just say we get this variable posts from there, and we'll loop through it just like that. Okay, so we can save this and go back. And now actually, instead of doing that entire list, we can say post list and import that, and it wants a prop of posts, and we can just add in the posts. So let's actually make it a small letter posts, and we give it the constant here. And if we go back into the component, we just make this small posts, and that should work. Let's go back, reload, everything looks fine still. Cool. So now we've broken that and refactored that into its own little component. So that's a little bit more clean. We can go ahead and refactor it even more by refactoring this box to be its own post component, post card. Let's create a post card component, and we can just call on this snippet again. And instead of adding in this box and everything in here, we actually then pull this out and render the post card instead. And to this post card, we're going to give a prop of that post that we're looping over. So we can paste everything in here and just start importing it again. Cool, and we're going to get a property here of post. So that's how we get that title loading up in there. Okay, so we need to import this post card, and it needs a key because once again we're in a for loop, so we can just use the post.id and save. Let's check it out. Why is it? Okay, there it formatted. Okay, if we go back, everything should still work and look as normal. Okay, so that's a good refactor. We have post cards and post lists. We can clean up these styles later using the Material UI styled function. So these are all good. This is fine. Now we start working on the modal. So I'm going to add this dialog and modal in here as well for now, and then we can refactor them out. So we want a dialog from Material UI, and it has a property of open, I believe. So let's add the property of open to true, and let's just add in a basic box in here. I want to add a box. Let's just give it a height and width of 100 pixels. Just faster typing it just, but width, and then we want the border of 1 pixel solid red. If we take a look at this, we can see it opened up the modal. So we have this background overlaid all the way. We can see if we hover over buttons, we don't get that cursor pointer. And everything within this box is now overlaid. So let's actually make this a little bit bigger. Let's give it a 400. So we now have this big box within a modal. So now we can build our form for adding or creating a post, and we're going to use it to edit a post within this little box. So let's do that. Okay. So by default, it renders, I think, a paper. Let's just close it up. No, it doesn't render paper. It just gives it a background color. Let's give this a background color of something else, just to be sure. Okay, so it takes that background color then. So by default, it makes the background color white. Okay, we can remove the border. And then we want to start adding in the following. So we want to add in, let's add in a paper. So it gives us a nice look from the get-go. We want some height. We want some padding within. So let's give it a 16 pixel padding. And then we want a typography where we specify create a new post. And then we want a button, and this button will say create, and this will be a variant of contained. If we save that, we should see a typography and a button. Okay, very, very simple. Let's give this a variant of, let's H6 as well. Well, that's good enough. Let's actually text align center it. So all of the CSS properties are available as props, or we can just add it as the SX. I just like going with the SX prop because you can continue on from there and customize it as you go. So just align that to the center. Let's give it some margin at the bottom of 8 pixels, or we can give it that gutter bottom. Okay, so with that done, let's actually go ahead and add in some text fields. So Material UI has very nice looking text fields. These are self-closing tags, and we're just going to have 2 fields. The one is going to have a label of title, what's your post's title, and the other one is going to have a value of what is your post body. So if we take a look at this, we should see 2 components, field components being rendered here, which is very nice. They're getting rendered underneath each other, but we want them to take up the full width like the button. So we can do it with all 3 of these components. We can specify the property full width, just like this, and it would now stretch up the full width. It won't overlap like that. We want some spacing between them, so let's give them all some spacing. The easiest way for me to get spacing across elements like this is going to be to make this paper display of flex with a flex direction of column. So direction of column, and then I want to give it a gap all the way between of 2. So I want each of these items to be 2 pixels or 16 pixels gap between them. Let's just make it 8. And then I'm going to remove the width and height, or keep the width. I'm just going to remove the height so it takes up its own necessary height. And if we close that, we can see we have this basic form. We can actually push down the button a little bit more. So we can give the button some more margin to the top. So we can say margin top. Let's give it another 8 pixels. So it should be 16 pixels in total difference now. Let's make it actually more. Let's make it a 24 pixels difference. Okay, so that looks better to me. And now we have this form inside of our modal. So how can we now use this modal when we click the button? So we need to toggle this open and close. So if we take a look at the React state, so I'm just going to hit a reload here, and then I would inspect this modal. Let's go and search for it. Dialog. We see the dialog here. It might not load now, so let me just hit a reload. Sometimes the DevTools are a little bit buggy. Okay, and we want to toggle this on or off. So if we toggle it on or off, we can see the modal is now displaying and hiding. So we need to toggle this value with a piece of state in React. So how can we do this? Okay, very easy. On our home page, we create a new piece of state. Let's use the use state hook from React. We set its default value to false, and we say toggle create dialog. Set toggle create dialog, or let's just create dialog, or create is going to be the wrong name, so let's call it toggle form dialog. Okay, so let's just call it form dialog for now, and this should be equals to the true value over here. So initially it's set to false, and whenever we click this button we want to toggle that piece of state. So we can add an on-click listener here with just a lambda function, and this function is basically just going to toggle our set toggle dialog form state, and it's going to turn it to true because once we click the button we want to actually open it. So if we go back, we can see the use state is not defined, so we need to actually import use state from React. So import from React the use state. Okay, if we go back, we can see it's working now. If I click on this button, it opens up the modal. And if I click on this backdrop, I want it to actually close as well. So how can I get it to close? Well, that's very simple. On the dialog, we have an onClose handler, an onClose prop. So we can check that out, onClose. And this will be a callback. We'll pass it a callback, and this callback will be called once the modal backdrop is clicked. So we have an on backdrop, I think. No, it's the onClose. So on the onClose, we want to set the toggle dialog to false. So let's test this out now. So now it's open. It's going to reload probably. If I click it, it closes. So anywhere in the backdrop within the modal, it's not closing, obviously. If I click the button, nothing's happening. If I click outside of it, it closes the modal. So this is how we can open and close this modal. We're going to do the same thing for the delete and for the edit. The edit would actually open the same one. We're just going to switch some of the values and pre-populate this form. So this is how we handle modals and dialogue. So let's actually set this up as a component. So I'm going to cut this all out of here, and I'm going to create a new component. Let's call it form dialog.js, and we create a functional component, and we paste in our dialog creation over here. Let's import all of these material UI elements again. The text field. So we can save this now. Now we need to get this onClose from up here. So we're going to get an onClose. We're going to get an open value, and we're going to get the onSubmit when we hit this create. So the onSubmit, we're pretty much going to give it some handler, some state and some handler for the state for these fields to handle what the user types in, and populate this when we get to the edit screen. So let's for now just keep it to these two values, and we can add in here onClose and open. Okay, so now we can use this form dialog inside of our main component here, and we're just going to provide it its necessary state prop. So onClose, for now it's the open, so toggle dialog form open, and this will just be that function that sets toggle to false. We need to import this. Is it not imported? No. Add component and save. If we go back, we now see it's still rendering our form. Okay, cool. So we have that dialog form set up. Now let's actually start working with that form. I want to actually be able to create a new post entry. Okay, so let's actually start connecting this up with state. So when I work with React applications and I do forms, and it has validation, and forms can become very complicated and very messy if you don't have a good and nice solid way of working with them. One way I've found to work with them is using Formik and Yup. So Formik is a hook library or a React library that helps you create forms in a very standard way. And it's very easy to get used to. Once you start using Formik for your forms, there's no going back. So I don't think we have Formik installed. Let's take a look in the package JSON. No, we don't. So let's actually go ahead and install those dependencies. So we're going to have two dependencies, yarn add. We're going to have the Formik dependency and the Yup dependency. So Yup is a validation JavaScript object validation library. It helps us validate the keys and check for minimum lengths, and it has a lot of cool functionality. And Formik helps us manage the state within our React application for the data of a form. So, you know, filling in the last name, have you touched the field or not, you know, all these type of stuff. So let's install these two properties, these two libraries. It should be pretty quick. Okay, so with that done, we now have these two libraries installed. So let's go ahead and use them. So on the home page, I'm going to create a Formik object. So I'm going to use the Formik hook. So we're going to say I'm going to create this Formik object, and I'm going to use the use Formik hook. So you can see it got imported from use Formik, and this use Formik hook allows me to configure how my form should look. So we can specify the initial values of state that our form will have. And because we have a very basic form, we only have a title and a body we need to keep track of. But there are other things as well. For example, if you wanted to edit the value, we will need the values ID. So we're going to need everything of a post. We're going to have like all these values within our Formik object that we want to be able to keep track of. So let's say the created at date, right? We don't want to be able to edit or do anything with that. We don't need any tracking of that state. So that's already just being loaded. So let's add in here the title and give it an empty string, and the body and give it an empty string. So I'm just going to use these two values because they are obvious to us now. We have a title and we have our body. And we want to give this Formik object an onSubmit handler. So what do we want to do when we want to when we have these values, the title and the body, and we hit submit? What do we want to happen? Well, we can specify a callback function, and this callback function will then run. So for now, we're not specifying anything within this callback function. It's just an empty one, but we want to start using this pieces of state. So instead of creating state up here, right, and saying this is the state for the title, and then we set the title, and then we have the body, and then we set the body. You know, instead of doing this for each of the values of a form, we specify it like this. And then we get more properties we can configure. We can specify when it does validation, when we set initial errors, initial status, was this field touched or not. And then we can add in the validation schema with Yup, which we will do in just a sec, which we can then validate each of these fields based on their data type and length, and you know, if they are there or not. So let's actually go ahead and remove this because we don't need that. Now let's start using this Formik object. So I want to actually see how it looks. So let's save it. Let's go to our React state, because that's always the best way of looking at a Formik object. And here I'm just going to look at the component that we have added this in, which is in the home page. So let's go to the home page. Home page down here, and we can see it has a piece of state value. I'm not seeing the Formik object here, so this is obviously not updated. So let's reload this page. Let's see if it actually updated. Oh, we haven't actually ran our project yet, again after installing. So let's just run our development server again. Okay, so now we have that launched again. Let's just go ahead and reload this page. Okay, we can see this page being loaded, and we're focused on the home page component. Now we can see there's hooks inside here, and we have the Formik hook. If we drop down this Formik hook, we can see this huge object. It has a lot of different things happening behind the scenes. It's managing state, it's managing validations. But the most important one we're looking at is this reducer. So in React, we have a reducer to manage state, and that's actually how Formik manages its state. and it gives us a nice few things. We can see values, errors, touched, status, is submitting, is validating, and submit count. So if you have a amount of times you're allowed to submit the form without it failing, or with it failing, then you can keep track of it. It actually has this functionality built in as well. So let's take a look. We have our two values, body and title, and we have errors and touched. So these are the three most important ones, and there is submitting. This is also a pretty important one. So we can use loading states and disabled buttons when things are submitting and stuff like that. So let's actually go ahead and look at this. So we want to give this Formik object to our new dialog. So in here, let's add the Formik component and then just pass it in as a prop. And let's get it, pull it out from here. We're pulling out that Formik object. And now we want to use that with our title and our body value. So we're going to set the value equals to Formik.values.title. So we remember, if we look at it, we have Formik.values.title. So this is the Formik object. Then we go into the reducer, which is the only part we actually see and get when we do the use Formik. Then we can use the title. And we can do the same thing for our body. Okay, so now it's populated with empty strings. Okay, so it's not able to find, we didn't save it from here, so we need to save this part here, where we actually pass in the Formik as an object. And now we have that set. So now if I start typing, we can see nothing is happening because we haven't two-way binded this to our Formik yet. So we need to set the on change, but let's actually change the values here, hello and world. And if we save that and go back, then it should be populated with hello world. Let's take a look at the home page. And we can see the Formik state. The initial values are still empty. You can see they are still empty. So this didn't update for some reason. So my initial values needs to change. And it's not being changed here. So let's refresh this. I think something might have just dropped wrong there. Yeah, now we can see hello and hello. It should actually be hello in world. So from here, we need to change this to body and not title. So if we view it now, we can see hello world is being populated. So let's set up the two-way binding. So that's pretty easy with Formik as well. We have an onChange function on here. And all that we do is say Formik, and it has a handle change function for a specific field. So we can give it the title field. So it's going to handle the change automatically for us. So we're going to have the onChange. Did I copy that as well? No. onChange. And paste it in like this. So now the two-way binding is actually set up. So if I were to start typing now and say hello world, and I were to go into the Formik object, we can now see that the values are actually being updated as I type. So from here you can see the values are updated. So this is pretty cool. Now we've set up our two-way binding for our form. So let's start doing the validation. So we always, this one is still using the body. So now if I were to change hello world, what is your name? Then you can see all the values reflect in state. So this is great. And the next thing we want to do is actually handle the validation of the values of the form. So let's do that with Yup. So this is also pretty easy. We're going to create a new validation schema up here. So let's just call it validation schema is equal to the following. So we're going to import everything as Yup from the Yup package. And here we say yup.object. So we're going to define an object now, a Yup object. And we specify these fields. So we have the title field and we have the body field. Okay. And the title field, we need to be of a string. So we then identify it as saying it's a Yup string. And the body is also of type string. But now we can chain on events or validation. So we want this to be required. So this field needs to have a value. It can't be empty or undefined. And then we can specify the error message. This, please enter value. This will be the error message that gets returned. And as follow, please enter a value. You can add for strings as well. Please enter a valid string. But for now, we just keep it like this. You can add different Yup abilities as well. We have one for max values. We have one for the length. We have one where you can actually go in when. You can add a when, and then you can add code and add like your own type of validation based on a key and toggle things. So Yup and Formik works very well together for complex forms. So we can just add form validation up here and then specify the form validation property. And because they are called the same, I can just do it like this. It should pick it up. Okay, cool. So now we have this validation happening on our form. So now if I actually take a look on our Formik object, our errors are currently empty. But if I start working with this value, so let's say I start adding in a number, it's going to tell my body. So once I've started typing, it has started validating my fields. So we can see we have a string value of 1, but then our body needs a value because our body is empty. If I start adding a value there, then we don't have any errors. So it's kind of doing this error validation and validation as we go. So we can specify things like the length, etc., etc. So now we want this to show us as an error message beneath our text inputs if there is an error. So if there is an error, the Formik errors value of that value will have an error. So let's paste that down here as well and make this the body. So let's save this and go back. So now we should see this in action actually happening. So let's close that and open it back up. If I were to remove this, you can see we have errors in both of these fields, and now they are outlined with red. Now we want to actually display this error message beneath the input as well. So we can say helper text, which is a nice property on the inputs, and we can add in the Formik.errors.title. So this would actually take in that error that we have. But this should be the one from the body. And we can save that and go back. Errors, this should be errors. And save this and go back. Now if we review it and we clear everything, we can see these errors. Please enter a value, please enter a value. And that's exactly what our error messages are. So this is a very cool way of adding form validation to your React app. And it can become very complex, so it's very customizable. But now, once we focus on the one, so let me open it up again. Let me actually go ahead and close, delete the defaults. So let's just give it a default of empty strings. So now every time, let's just reload that piece of state. So every time I open the first one and I unfocus it, or if I start typing, let's say I start typing A, it gives me validation on body as well. But we don't want this. We only want it to validate once I unfocus the field. So if I start typing and I unfocus, then it should validate whether it is correct or not. And this button shouldn't be activated if the entire form isn't valid to submit yet. So how do we do this? It's quite easy. We're going to use the onBlur events. So once we do an onChange, we want to do an onBlur of this same thing. And this will then keep track of our touched field in the Formik object. So we'll take a look at that now. So we're just specifying the handle blur and the onBlur on each of these. I'm going to save it like this. And now if I go back and view the homepage Formik object again, here we can see the touched values is an empty object. So now if I go back and I actually touch it and I would blur, which means unfocus it, it's now going to highlight as the title property has been touched equals true. So now we know you've touched it and there is an error in this field. So now we need to display the error to you. So how would we do this? Well, it's just playing around with these values, right? If there is an error, we want to show the error value. But first, before we show the error, we first want to check if this field was actually touched. Okay, so both of these fields should equal to true. before we can show the error. So I'm going to copy this setup for both down here. I'm just going to change the title to body, and now we should fix that issue. So if I were to reload this and open up my field, if I focus this and unfocus, we only have an error on this field. We don't have an error on this field. We're still seeing the helper text, but it's not giving the error outline. So this is working good. So if we unfocus this, now we get that error. So let's actually show how we can do it for the helper text as well. We only want to show the helper text if the same statement as above is true. So we can utilize JavaScript the same way. We're saying if we have touched it, then we show the error. So how this would work is it would return the value of the truthy if the statement is truthy. It would return the last value if this statement is truthy, which is the error message. So if it is not touched, it's not going to return the error message. So let's do the same thing for down here. We copy the statement. So it's quite simple, and paste it in like this. Just correctly spell that. And if we go back, we can now test it out. Unfocus, it's only showing the error there. If I start typing, it validates it to being true. If I unfocus, it's now showing everything is good. And if I were to unfocus this, we have an error. And if I start typing, it's valid. So now we want to toggle this button's clickable state. It's always clickable, even though the form isn't valid, which at this point it should be grayed out and not allowing us to continue, because we first need to do this. So very easy. The button has a disabled property, and the disabled property we are going to set as follow. Disabled, let's check it out like this, and we want to set it if the Formik dot is valid property. So there is a is valid property on Formik. If the form is valid, then we want to be not disabled. So let's inverse this. If the form is not valid, then we want to be disabled. But there's other places where we want the form to be, the button to be disabled as well. It's when Formik dot is submitting. When we are doing a submit, right? Submitting, then we don't want it to spam the button and submit the whole time. So we're kind of freezing the button for the time the form is submitting. And there's another time where we want it to be disabled, is once Formik loads the first time, right? We have a property called dirty if the form has been touched. So if the values in the text field have been changed from what they were previously, then we have this field called dirty. And by default, dirty is set to false, obviously, because we haven't touched the form initially yet. So we can say if Formik.dirty, if this value is false and the Formik.is valid, so we haven't touched the form yet, but somehow the form is valid, then we also want it to be disabled. So by default, the is valid property at the first load of the use Formik hook is true. So we can set this to false, but for here we are checking if this is the case, this button should be disabled. So if we go back and we check this out now, let's actually do a refresh. This should disable the button. Let's check. Okay, it shouldn't be an and for all of these. This should be an or. So when either one of these exceptions are true, it should be disabled. So if we view it now, we can see the button is disabled because this field is having an error. If I start typing it, the button is enabled. So this is a very cool way of handling form validation with Yup and Formik in your React application. So let's actually reload it the first time and open it up from scratch just to see the form state. Everything is disabled. I can start typing, can't submit yet. Value is an empty. Now I can submit the button. Okay, cool. So this is working. Let's actually go ahead and start creating talking to the server now. So we're going to talk to our backend to actually create this post and start loading the real posts into our application. Okay, so let's actually start working with some real data. So currently we are getting these dummy data into our post list, but we're just adding it directly, statically in like this. Let's start fetching it the React way or the Next.js way. So how do we do that? Well, with Next.js, we can still fetch data the React way, where we have some use effect. And then in this use effect, we will do the API call where we fetch that data. So we'll have some fetch function where we'll get that data. This would be in some asynchronous function like this. Let's make it an iffy. So we'll fetch the data from our API, and then we'll set it equal to the post's state. So we'll have some state where we'll then set this data equals to. Okay. So this is the React way of doing it, and then we'll have some piece of state which is our posts, and then we'll set the posts. But with Next.js, we have a bit more flexibility to fetching data in our React apps. We can do it from the server side. So this is very powerful when loading your applications, because now you have better SEO, because your page's data gets populated on the server side and hydrated into your page as it gets delivered and built on the client. So this is very, very, very exciting stuff, and definitely the future of building these single page application websites, specifically websites, because websites benefit from these performance, moving some of the, fetching the data on the server and then just rendering the populated page. So in Next.js, we don't do it with the use effect way. We fetch it from the client, from the server. And how do we tell Next.js to actually fetch this data from the server? Well, Next.js, only in the pages directory, we need to export a function, an asynchronous function, and the names of these functions are very important. We have get server side props, and then we have get static props. So it's another function, just another name, get static props, and then the get static paths. So these are the three different functions we can use within Next.js pages to fetch data for that page and their components. So which one would we use for which reason? So the get server side props fetches the data every time we load that page. So it's pretty much acting like a page that gets rendered on the server every single time from scratch that we're doing. Where the get static props creates a cached version of that page. At build time, it actually creates a static version of that page. It goes and fetches the API data at build time. It makes the call in this function. It gets the data and it populates that page. And then once that page is populated, Next.js actually caches that as a static page and serves that to you. So it's very, very quick. So you can determine when to use which one of these based on your application needs. And then we have the get static paths. This is usually in combination with the get static props. Whenever we use the get static props on a dynamic page. So for example, we're viewing a specific product in an e-commerce. When we go into the page of that specific product, we are having to do the get static paths as well. So this is some more intrinsic detail that I'm not going to go into. For our application needs today, we are going to be using the get server side props, because every time we load up our feed, we want it to get the newly created data, right? We don't want it to still have the old data from the first time the app got built. We want the new data every time. So there are ways of using the get static props and fetching, incrementally regenerating these pages with a process called revalidating. So we can set a revalidating prop and pretty much tell Next.js to recreate this page with the new data every, let's say, minute or so. So with the get server-side props function created here, we need to return an object with a field of props and another object. Because this is how we then give this data to the page in the forms of props. So whatever props we add to this object, we can then destructure from the page up here, which is very, very cool. Okay, so let's actually do that. Instead of loading our posts from a constant like this, why don't we send it through the Next.js data fetching loop to see this in action? So I'm going to close this down. Let's actually get these posts. So we have a function where we get the posts. And for now, we're just going to set it equal to this array up here. We're going to actually paste in that array down here. Let's just indent everything properly. Okay. Now we can collapse this. And now we actually want to send these posts through our Next.js data fetching process and into our props. So now from here, I can actually destructure these posts and then use it within my application here, where I sent the array previously. I can now just send the posts in like this. So now if I were to actually save this, let's just make sure everything is fine. It looks fine, everything compiles. Now let's go back to our app. And we can see everything is still loading as normal. So if we do a refresh, we can see the page actually now gets rendered with all the components in it already. So that's the advantage of using Next.js. If we would have fetched the data the React way, there would have been no data populated in this first load of the page, and our bot would have read an empty page primarily. So now we get this advantage. Okay, so that's the first thing we learned that's powerful about Next.js, and that's probably the most, reason why a lot of people use Next.js. We get a lot of other benefits, like the routing, which is awesome. We get image optimization and lazy loading of images. We get code splitting and just a lot of cool web optimizations with Next.js to ensure we have a very good performing website. Okay, so now that we have the data fetched in our application, this should now become an API call. We should start fetching the data from our actual API. So let's start doing that. I'm going to delete all of this and I'm going to create a function called get posts, get all posts. Let's just call it get all posts, and I'm going to call it here. And this is going to be an asynchronous function. We haven't created this function yet, but let's go do that. I'm going to create a new folder in my root directory called services. And in here, I'm just going to create a file with the name of getAllPosts.js. And in here, I'm just going to export an asynchronous function with that same name. Let's actually export it as default. So we can say export default, the getAllPosts. So this function is going to do some data fetching. So we're going to be using Axios. So let's actually go ahead and install Axios quickly in our application. So we can say yarn add Axios. While that's done, that should be quick. I usually go and create something called a base interceptor or a base API. And you'll see why I do this. It's just for customizability. So I'm just going to create a new one here called base API.js. And in here, I'm just importing Axios from Axios. And then I am creating a new base API, which will be axios.create. And here I'm going to set the base URL equals to our API. So our API's endpoint would be /localhost, and then it's 3001 if I remember correctly. So here we have our base API. We can export this as default base API. Okay, and then in here I import base API from that base API, and then I can say const I get my response await, and I'm going to do a base API.get. And now I've already specified the base path, so I can just continue on from here. So if you remember our API from the previous video, we specified posts, getting all the posts this way, just the /post route, and then we want to console log it out, see what we're getting. Let's check out the res.data. With Axios, it usually returns it inside of a data field, and then I want to return as this function res.data. Okay, So let's actually do that console log from in here. So let's console log the posts that we get. And now I actually want to import this function. Here we go, from services. Okay, and now it should be called. But our API is not running yet, so we should see an error. Yeah, it's not running, error refused because it's not able to connect. So let's actually go ahead and start up our API. Okay, so I'm going to go into my backend project over here. And we need to start up a few things. So I'm starting up the first terminal, which is our Docker Compose up. If you don't have this code, feel free to just go and get it from the GitHub repo in the previous video of the series. I'll also link this code base GitHub repo, and then you install this code base on your computer. It has a Docker Compose file for you to run a Postgres database. So all you need to do is run Docker Compose up, and then you should have a Postgres database running. And in the second terminal in that same directory, you can run yarn start, which is the script to start over here, which is the script to start our server. So let's start that up. We should see nodemon, it's logging, the server should connect, and the database should connect. Okay, the server is running on port 3001 and the database is connected. Great. So now let's actually go and test out our front-end code. So now this should actually be fetching actual posts. So if we log that out and go back to our website and let's do a reload on this, we can see we're having one function, post.map is not a function. So let's take a look at what we got back here. We got an error, map is not a function. And here we can see the posts got logged out. I'm just gonna make this bigger. And we can see the posts that got logged out is again within a data property. So it's inside of a data field. Our API is actually putting it within a data field. And here we can see all of the data and the count. So here we can see our API response actually being logged out for us. So in order to get the real posts, we then need to say posts, and this will be the posts.data. Okay, let's try that. Let's do a reload. Let's see if everything's fine. And we can actually see our posts from the database being loaded. So we have 10 posts in our database and being called from our API. So let's do a reload again. Let's just make sure. We can see from here, it gets populated with all of the posts. If we actually go to our API backend project, in our network logs, we can see these requests got made. So we pretty much got the data a few times from our API. So now we've set up our project to actually talk to our database when it comes to fetching the data. So this data is no longer fake data from our array. This is actually coming from our database. So this is a good moving forward point. So let's actually go ahead and start creating a post. So I want to go in here and create a post. So let's do that next. Okay, so for us to be able to create a post, we need to take the information all the way from here and make a request to our API. So let's actually take a look at the API we need to make a request to. So I'm going to go to my backend and I'm going to pull up the Thunder client and I'm just going to bring up an example API here. So what we have here is we're going to make a localhost call to port of our API 3001 and we have the posts collection. So let's get them all. We can see them all here. All the data, there's 10 posts. So this is coming from our API. So for me to create a new post, I need to make a post request to the same URL, but in the body, I need to provide a title. So new post, and I need to provide a body. This is the body of new post. Okay. And then I just hit send. And this will create a new post in our database and it will return a JSON object that has data and count. And this data will contain the newly created entry from our database. So we have the ID, we we have the data we added, and then the create and updated that. Okay, so this is what we're going to need to do, but from the front end. So in order to do this, I like to start by creating that service. So let's go and create that service to create new post.js. And this is just going to be a function. We're going to export default create new post. Okay, let's create that function. So it's an asynchronous function, create new post. And it's going to accept the post data as an object. We're going to get the title, and we're going to get the body as parameters. So in order to use this, we then do the following. We once again import the base API from our base API setup. And then we do the following. We res await, we take the base API, and then we make a post request to the API of /posts. We need to give it the data. So the newly created data is going to be the title and the body. So we can actually add it in directly like this. We created data, and then just pass it in directly. And then we need the config. So we don't have any headers or anything that we want to configure. We just upload this. So this is not a secure API. It's just taking the data and then updating it. So we need, or creating it. So we create this data, and then we want to return, once this is successful, the res.data. Okay, and if we save that, we have now created the function that will go ahead and create our database. So it's doing what we've done here pretty much. It's taking that body and it's submitting it to this endpoint with a post request and returning the body that gets returned back. So now let's use this inside of our submit function. So where we are doing the submit over here, we can actually provide this form. So the form dialog has a button, right? So if we go and view our application, if I were to click this button, we need to be able to submit the form. So I'm just going to reload, just checking the form validation. Yeah, that's fine. So this button, if we hit this button, it should submit the values in this form. So we are handling the values in the form within this Formik object, and we have this onSubmit handler ready to be submitted. So in here, we are going to take the values. So this gets two parameters or arguments. We have values and we have Formik helpers. So Formik helpers. And in this function, we can then do the try catch, where we have an error possibly. So console.error, that error out. Okay. Else in the try catch part, we want to actually console log out the values. So let's just log out the values that we get back here and the Formik helper. So let's see what we get back. Okay. In order to run this onSubmit, from this Formik function, we get an onSubmit handler. So in this dialog, in the button, we can have an onClick. And this onClick will pretty much then just call the Formik.handleSubmit. Okay. So now if I go back to my application and I actually fill this in, let's go to the console and let's fill in this form. So testing, and I hit create, we can see the following being logged. We see the object and we see the Formik helpers. So the Formik helper, we get reset form, set errors, set fields. So we can do a lot of different operations for our form. So here we can see the data of the values being logged out. So that is how we actually get these values in our form submit handler. So from here, we will then call that API service we just created. So we'll say const res equals await, and we want to say create new post. As a function, we import that, and then we provide it with the title and with the body. So in order to get the title, we we can actually just pass in that entire values object. So let's pass it in like this, values, and create it. So this await is given an error because we need to make this function asynchronous. Okay, so now we're making the request. I want to console log out this res once it is done. Okay, let's try it out. So once this is doing the submit, it is actually setting the form into a submitting phase. So let's go ahead and show you from here. If I say homepage and I view the Formik object, let's take a look at the submitting value. Currently, the submitting value is actually true. And this is because when I submitted it, you can see it's actually disabled because it's currently still submitting, but nothing happened. So once we're done with this finally, so with this try catch, in the finally block, we can say Formik helpers dot is submitting or set submitting, set loading, or what's it called, set submitting equals to false. Okay, just like this. So when we save this and go back and we create a new post, let's actually give this a reload. So from here, if I were to type in, let's go into the Formik object, we can see the submitting is actually false. So let's go ahead and add testing, and let's submit it now. We can see it quickly submitted it. So let's go to the network logs. There was a course error. So we actually got some course error from doing the post. So we wanted to do a post to this endpoint. Let's just clean this up. Yeah, so the course error. So this is a dreadful error in front-end development, but you're gonna have to be able to understand where it's coming from and how to solve it. Sometimes you can't if you don't have access to the backend, but at least you then know. Okay, so let's do that again. So I'm going to submit it again. So you can see it's activated again. So I'm going to submit it. And then we get this error where here's the Axios error that gets logged out. So we can see the Axios error. Network error. Is it giving us any information here other than network error? It's just giving us the network error. But here we can see the access control allow origin. So this is the CORS error, CORS policy. And from our network tab, we can also see it's giving us the CORS error. And what this means, right, is our application from localhost 3000 is trying to make a request with a post body to our server. And servers don't allow that unless you open them for any API. So actually the browser is stopping us from making a request to API because we are not pretty much whitelisted on that API. So in order to do this, from the backend, we need to make a quick tweak. So if you followed me with the backend application, then you can quickly do this with me. It's going to be very quick. We already have a package installed called course, and now we're going to use that inside of our index.js of the backend. Right underneath where we use the express JSON, we actually want to use the cores as well. So let's import cores. So just like we did with Morgan, I'm going to import cores, and this cores gets an object with origin. And this origin can be an array of strings or just a single string. And here we need to specify our domain or our origin of our front end. So our front end is on localhost 3001. So if I save this, it would do a reload connected database again, but now we are pretty much whitelisted. So now we are allowed to make these requests to our server. So let's try that again. From our front end application, let's go ahead and submit a new post, testing. Let's submit, and we see all green flags. We have submitted the post as okay, and we got back the data as follows. So here we can see the data being brought back by the API. So now we need to do something with this data that we just got back. Currently, we're not doing anything with it. So I need to refresh again in order to see my newly created post. So here you can see all the posts that was created, and here's my newly created one, testing. So I can delete this one, edit this one. Currently it's not doing anything. So we have just set up the ability to create a post, but we need to manage the state in here to reflect our update. So once we get this back, so once we get this response back, we need to add it to this posts. So let's actually take a look and see if we can just push it back into this posts array. So I'm going to say posts.push, and in here I'm going to push res.data, which gets responded, right? Because on the network request, we can see we did the network request and it sent us back the res data, and then in there we have a data property that contains our new object. So we need to push that back into our posts. So let's actually do that and see if it works. If I save and I refresh, let's just check everything. All is good. Now we're going to create a new one. Let's call it new testing. New testing. And let's create. We can see it created it successfully, but did it add it? Let's see. Right at the bottom, we can see new testing. It added it right at the bottom of our application. So we can actually, in order to get it from the last position to the first or the newest one, we can, instead of pushing it onto this array, we can do a method called onShift in JavaScript, which will push it to the beginning of the array. So that's the only change we need to do here. Let's save that and go back. Let's actually do a refresher here, or not a new tab. Let's just do a refresh. We can see it's now being loaded at the top from the database side. So let's actually create a new one. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. And let's create. We can see it created it at the top. So now I want a few things to happen once I've created. One, I want to clear the form and close the form. So let's do that. Once I've created the post here, I want to use this Formik helpers to reset the form. And I want to set the toggle form dialog to false. So now it should give us a better experience. So once I create a new one, let's just reload to get a fresh start. Once I enter and add in testing 2, 3, testing 2, 3, you can see it added testing 2, 3, it closed the modal, and if I open it again, the form was cleared. So that's a much better experience. Now we've actually been talking to the database, submitting data. Now we want to be able to edit and delete the data. So let's actually start with the delete. This is going to be the quickest one. We're going to build a modal that just warns us, are you sure? And then once we say okay, it continues, else it doesn't do anything. And the edit, it's going to open up this one. It's going to change this title to edit a post. This is going to say edit or update, and then it's going to pre-populate these values for you. So let's do the delete quickly. Okay, so to work on the delete, whenever we click that delete button, we want to toggle a modal specific for a post that we want to delete. So we want to know from this page what we want to delete, because we're going to have a delete function here. So let's actually think of how we're going to structure this. So first, let's build a modal. We're going to need almost the same setup that we have here, but this we'll call the delete dialog, and the delete dialog will be shown whenever we say open toggle delete dialog, and we can have an on close. The on close will pretty much then just untoggle that, so we can set toggle delete dialog. So we don't have that yet, so let's actually go ahead and add that. So it's pretty quick, just duplicating this. So we're getting the toggle dialog and the delete dialog. This is also set to false. And then we're opening the delete dialog when this is toggled and closing it for this reason. And then another reason is we want to give it a callback that fires whenever we actually hit OK. So once we hit OK, it needs to go and delete a post by ID. So how do we keep track of what post you've clicked on? So we'll create some piece of state here, and we call it delete post by ID, and then we can say set delete post by ID. And currently we can just set it to null because we haven't selected anyone. And as soon as we click on the delete button on any one of these posts, so for this post list, for each one of the posts, if we go into the post card, once we click the delete button, we want something to happen. We want, first of all, it to populate from this point. It needs to add which one we clicked. And then we need to be able to open this dialog, and this dialog will have on delete handler. And this on delete handler will then pretty much handle delete. Be a function where we can handle the delete. And it will take whatever value we have in state. So in this delete by ID, it would go and delete. So if there is actually a value here, so delete by post by ID. So if it's not here, we just want to do a quick return. So we're just short circuiting here. Else the rest of the code will execute. And what code do we want to execute? Well, this will be an asynchronous function, and we'll have some try catch here, and we'll console.error the error if there were to be an error. And then from here, we will do the delete function. So let's go ahead and create that delete function. So here we're going to call delete post by ID.js. Let's copy that name. Let's create a function. So we're going to have an asynchronous function with this name, delete post by ID. We'll get the ID as an argument, and then we'll have some function running from our base API, and this will be a delete to the slash. Let's use these quotes, and then we have the posts slash and then the ID of the post. So this will delete that post, and then we just want to return res.data and export this as default function. Export default delete post by ID. Okay, and we want to import this here, so we're going to say res equals to await delete post by ID, and we're going to send it the delete post by ID. Okay, let's console log out if this would to have been successful and see what we get. And once this is successful, what do we want to do, right? We want to take this posts object or this posts array, and then we want to remove whatever ID was removed. So we can actually say posts dot filter. So I'm not sure if I'm able to reset this to anything. Let's see. Otherwise, I might need to adjust my setup here. Post.filter. Okay, and we want to filter through all of the posts where the post.id, where this is not equal to the deleted post. So this post that we just deleted, we want to retrieve everything except for that post. So it's going to reset our posts to be equal to that. I think this might not work, but let's actually take a look. Let's see what we get. Save. And what is our error? We don't have this delete dialog yet, so let's go ahead and create that as a functional component. .js rafce. Let's get that out there. And once again we're going to need a dialog from material UI. So we have our dialog, which will be opened, and on close will be handling. And let's get these from our props. So we have open and on close. Open and on close. On close. just like this. So we have the dialog going. Now we want the actual box within to warn us. So we have some typography, deleting post, and then are you sure you want to delete this post? Hit delete to continue. Let's just say press, click. Okay, and then we have a button, and this button then just has delete. We can give it a color of error, as it is a delete button, and we give it a variant of contained, as it's the main CTA of this page. So let's actually take a look how this would go. Let's give it a gutter bottom for each of these texts so it doesn't look so squished. We can give this some margin to the top of, let's say, 4 of the material UI spacing units. And then we can actually import this one. Let's import this. And we have an onDelete handler, which will be fired if we click on this. So we have the onClick and onDelete handler. Let's pull that up from here. Okay, so onDelete handler, save. Okay, so this should actually work now. Let's save this and go back. Whenever I click on the delete button of any post, it should open this dialog menu. So we haven't set up anything to actually open this dialog menu yet. So let's just toggle it to true from the beginning, just so we can view it. And if we look at it, it looks terrible. It looks like this, so we can give it some padding, make that a bigger font, and center align that. So let's quickly do that. That's very quick. So we can say SX text align, and let's align this to the center. Let's give this a variant of the H6 again, and this would just be a variant of body 1, which is fine. Let's give it some margin, a vertical of 2, just to give it some equal spacing around. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Let's also text align this in the center, and then we add some padding. Let's add a box around it internally, and then we copy all of this code. We didn't import this box from Material UI, so let's get that. And then we're just going to give some padding all around. Okay, this looks a lot better. I think this one has more padding. Yeah, I think so. Let's reload, open it up. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so now we've set this up. So now we want to actually open this whenever we click on one of these deletes. And once we click on the delete, we want to let our app know which one we clicked on and then open that modal. Once we hit that modal, it should go and delete the one that we've selected. Okay, so let's go ahead and set that up. So we might need to do some prop drilling. When we get to our post list, we want to take our posts, and we want our posts to be ordered to delete itself. So how do we set it up so it adds that value over here? That's a very good question. So inside of our post list, we need to provide it to each of the cards. So each of the cards will have a handle delete on delete. Okay, and then this on delete will pretty much set the value, set this value. So to this we can provide it that set function. Okay, so I'm doing a little bit of prop drilling here. I'm getting this function, and then we want to set the value of the post that we're just clicking on. So we want to set that ID. Okay, and we're probably going to do the same for the edit at this point. So in here we have this on delete pressed, and we're going to take that on delete and just add it as an on click function over here. Cool. So this should work. Let's just backtrack. We're adding the ID here. This is the delete dialog, which we'll then call the onDelete handler. And all the way over here, we are setting that. So let's try this out. This should actually work now. So let's clear all our consoles. Let's delete. It's not opening anything, and it's also not firing any network requests. So once we do the onDelete, we actually want a few things to happen. So set deleted post, set deleted post. So we want a few things to happen. We want not just to set it here, but we also want to open the delete dialog. So we want to toggle this open. So let's move this all the way through. So we're providing the toggle the delete function to the post list. And once we click on the delete, we want to toggle this to true. Okay. And once we click the delete button over here, the onDelete handler, which we're passing in down here, which is the delete. And currently we're just deleting it, and then we're not closing it at the end. So let's onDelete. We want to first set the toggle delete dialog to false. So we're closing the dialog once we clicked on the delete. So I did a few things there. So let's actually go and test it out now. I'm going to click on delete, and we have the set toggle delete dialog is not defined. So I don't think I destructured it from the props properly. So when we look at it here, no, I did not. So let's provide that in there, and let's try again. Just going to do a quick delete here. We can see it opens up our modal deleting post. Are you sure you want to delete this post? Let's go to the network. We say delete, and it did not delete the post. Let's take a look at our console. Let's see if we have any errors. Delete post by ID is not a function. So we haven't imported this function, I think, correctly. So from here, delete post by ID. It's never imported at the top. So let's actually import this from our services. Delete post by ID. So we should rename this because it's using the same state name. So delete post. Let's just say delete post. Just like this. Okay, so now we're going to need to change this out as well from over here. Save this. Let's go to the post list. Let's just update this name as well. Okay, not that that matters, but we can change it there, handling the delete. So once this is successful, we don't need the response. We're updating the posts array. Okay, but let's see if this works now. We need to import this first. So let's import this from our services. Great. Let's import it. Let's try it out again. Let's refresh everything. So we're going to delete. Okay, I've got it set up to be true. So let's close that up for now and refresh. So everything should work now. Let's try doing it. Okay, delete. It opens up the delete. Are you sure? Yes, we want to delete. And let's see, did it fire off the network request? We actually did fire off the network request, so it did delete the post, but we're still seeing the post here. So this functionality here is clearly not working. So there's no way to mutate this directly. We can push to it, but how do we remove from it? So this is not doing an inline remove, it's returning a new array. So we need to set this new array equals to this one over here. So this is a quick fix. Instead of using the posts prop here, we can create a new piece of state, and we're just going to set the posts default there. And let's say if the post is empty, we just default it to an array. And we have here, what do we call this? All posts. Set all posts. Okay, so the all posts, now we give this to the post list instead of just the posts. And once we've created a new one, we don't push or unshift here. We need to add it to set all posts. So we're going to say set all posts. We take all the previous posts and we unshift. So we're going to do the same thing here, but instead we're using the previous. So we're taking the previous value and then we're unshifting it. But I don't think we can do it unshift like this. So we're going to need to spread. We're going to add in res.data and add in the previous values in the array. So if we save this and check it out now, let's just make sure. Let's reload everything. All right. So now if I create a new one, let's just call it like this. You can see it added it new. Let's delete it now. And it has not removed it. So let's update our delete logic over here. So instead of doing this, we're going to say set all posts equals to previous. And then we just take previous and we filter that out. So we return a new array that just doesn't have the old post that we deleted. So let's try it again. Let's refresh. This should be gone now. So we're not seeing it. So let's refresh it now. Delete. And we can see it was removed from state. So now we can actually go ahead and delete all of our posts that we created newly. And if we do a refresh, they should not show up anymore. Okay, so now they're all in order again. We can see they're nicely in order. If I add a new one, let's add new post, and we create it. We see the new post at the top and all of the rest are aligned perfectly. And let's delete from the bottom. It's deleted from the bottom. Let's delete from the middle here, and it's deleted it from the middle. So our deleting, our creation, and our loading is working. So let's actually go ahead and work on the edit. Okay, so in order to do the edit, we're going to have the same type of setup with our delete. We're going to need to somehow keep track of which one we've clicked on to edit. So if I click on the edit button here, it should know I've clicked on this one and then populate this form with the new, or the one we want to update. And then once I would go ahead and hit the update button, it should know which post it's busy updating and then do the necessary state changes. So let's dive into that. Once I click on that button, let's go from there. Okay, so I'm in the post list and I'm in the post card and I click on this edit button. What do I want to happen? I want, first of all, to open, so on edit, let's just pass that in here. Okay, and then the post list, we get the on edit, and this on edit will then run some logic. This on edit will set whatever post we clicked on in this state here. So let's create that state. On edit post, set edit post, and for now we just set it equals to null. And then once I click on that, so let's actually send that down. So we set delete posts, and so set delete posts, and we can say set edit post. Okay, and once we get that set edit post, we want to pull it in here, and we want to set that post equals to set edit post, and then we want to open up our okay, so this shouldn't be in the delete, it should be in the edit, and then I want to set toggle my form dialog. So I want to open my form dialog equals to true. So how do I do this? Well, once again, I need to provide it with this state function. Okay, let's pull it in all the way through up until here. Okay, so we got access to that function. Okay, and now once that is open, so once we open this dialog, this dialog should have some values already set. So once we call this edit and we set the value, we need to send that down, because the values are handled with Formik over here. So we need to somehow populate these values in Formik and tell our modal that's opening when we delete. So let's actually see if that happens. So if I were to press edit now, it needs to open this modal because I'm editing. It's doing the same thing, but now it's selecting also. If we take a look at the state homepage, so the homepage state, we can see we have this value as null and we have the post that we clicked on. If I choose another one, so let's edit post 2, we can see it should update to post 2. There we can see it updated to post 2. Okay, so we are keeping track of that, but how are we telling this modal to load that data now? So the easiest way I can think of is to add a new value in here called ID. And let's specify it as being null at the start. So whenever we have a value, so we're not going to do this setup we're doing over here. We're going to repopulate it into this field. So with this function, let's just send in the Formik operator. And then once we do the edit, we don't set it like this. All that we're going to do is we're going to say Formik. So let's import that Formik instead. So you can say Formik, and we're going to set field value. And we want to set what field's value? Well, the title we want to set equals to the post.title. Want one for the ID and one for the body. So let's say body, post.body, and then the ID. So we want to set the ID field here. And whenever the ID field is set, we know we're busy editing something. So this is not necessarily the best way of handling this, but it's a way of handling it, right? So for this basic situation, this would be fine. Whenever we have a value of null for ID, it means we're creating our new one. If we have a value for a non-null value, then we know we're trying to update one. So from here, we can then have some logic where we say value.id. If this is true, or it's not null, then we should do this. Else, we want to maybe do something else. So first of all, this should always happen. We should always reset it afterwards. So these are the two things that might just change. We get back the newly created value, and then we need to update it at that same spot in our set all posts. So instead of doing it like this, we're actually gonna do a filter again. So we're gonna do the previous posts, we're gonna filter through each of them, and where the post.id is equal to the res.data.id. Well, let's just take the vals.id, values.id. Whenever it's equal to this, then we need to change it. So instead of returning the actual post, we want to create an updated post. So let's actually do this inside of a function and with an if statement. Okay, just like this. Okay, then we want to return. We first want to take that post and set at that value, we want to set it equals to the res.data to the new post. Else, we would just want to return the current post that we have. So we could have done this in one line, return this or this when we hit this breakpoint, but this is more clear to me. Okay, so now that we've done this, we're not using the create new post method, we're updating post by ID method, by ID, and it's going to take in the values we've added as well as the ID. So the values.id. So it will actually have that value within the values. So let's go ahead and update this. Let's go to the services. Let's create a new service. Export default as follow. Synchronous function that receives some values. And we want to get our response from the base API. And we want to do a put request to what API endpoint. Let's use the string literals again. Not API, so it's post slash, and then what is the ID? So values.id, and then the new data. So values. Let's take the title as values.title, and the body as values.body. Okay, just like this, and then we can return the res.data. So now we have the function that would update posts by ID. So let's actually go ahead and use that here. Import it from services, and I think this should work. So let's actually try it out. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to do a quick refresh. Everything seems to still be working. Let's actually edit this. It's not opening our state because we can see Formik set field value cannot read property of undefined. So this Formik is undefined for some reason. So let's check out why. So in this list, this Formik value, it's not getting passed through. So let's take a look at this edit post, the edit post. Okay, it's called Formik. So let's just call it Formik here as well. That's the only reason. And let's check it out now. If I want to edit, it actually pre-populates everything for me. And then I can say updated. And this is still wrong. It's saying create, but let's go ahead anyway. Let's say create. And we can see it has the new post updated, which was the first one, right? Let's edit this one. And let's call it second updated, and just update this one. And we can see it moved to the top now. So once we've added it, it's moved to the top. And if we do the refresh, in what order should it be? And is it even being... Okay, so the ordering here is still fine. Let's update this one. And it moves it to the top. So this shouldn't be happening. So once we have done the handle delete, once we're doing the save here, set all posts, we want to get where the post that we're looping through .id of that post is equal to the value, and then we want to return the updated one. But this shouldn't be changing the order of the posts. It shouldn't be moving it to the top. So if the value.id, because it clears the form either way once we're done and closes it. So if I open it again, it's all done. Okay, so we need to make sure that it gets added to its same location, which it feels it should be, right? Because we're doing set all, we're taking all the previous ones, we're doing a filter. And if the returns the element if an array meets the condition. Okay, so this should be a map, sorry, not a filter. Because we're creating a new array. We're not returning based on true or false, we're creating a new array. So this is the reason. So if I update this now, let's do a refresh. We can see update 1 is at the top. So if I were to update 2, let's make this changed like this and create. It's still moving it to the top. So this is still not doing the right thing. So if the post ID that we're currently looping through, if its ID is equals to the value ID, so the one we just edited, then we want to return the newly created one. Oh, I'm doing it wrong here. This should be if there's no ID. Then we do the create, else we do the update. Okay, so this is my bad. It's actually been doing creates all this time. We've been doing posts the whole time. So that's not correct. Let's actually reload this. We have a load of post ones. We can actually see I've been doing the same. I've been creating new posts the whole time. So let's actually go ahead and delete this. And let's refresh. It now returns all of our posts in order correctly. So let's try this again. I'm going to create or edit this one. So I'm going to edit post 3 and just call it updated and update. And it updates in the spot. So I can update this one and just call it updated and create. And we can see it updates on the spot. So now we've pretty much covered all of the functionality for building this full stack application. So we can go ahead and start cleaning up some of these functionalities. But I think for now, this is good enough. We've covered a lot of things. We've worked with Next.js and Material UI. We've done some form validation with Formik and Yup. And we've learned how to manage our state and open modals and close modals. And then we've learned how to fetch data from the backend and update it. How we can structure our applications to work with services as well, and then set up a base API using Axios. So this is it for the tutorial. Let's actually just demo everything again and see that everything is working fine. We can delete posts. So this is still not looking the best. So let's actually go ahead and clean up some of this stuff. So the component, the delete dialog, I actually want this to be a dialog title. Dialog title. Or is there a dialog heading? No, it's dialog title. And then in the dialog title, I want to add in this text typography. So let's import this dialog title from Material UI and save this. Okay, and then this is in the delete. So if we hit the delete, we can see we have this better looking title. So let's remove that. It's not going to center it anymore, but we can see it has like a little bit of a different situation there. So we can say dialog content and move everything within there, which is only this text. And then the button will be part of dialog actions. Dialog actions. So any like buttons. And you'll just see it just gives it a nice grouping. That's pretty much the gist of it. Dialog actions. Okay, so if we delete now, it's kind of just grouping things a little bit better. So we can remove all of the margin and the text align centers. We can remove that. We can remove all of these margins. So let's take a look. It just looks a little bit better. And when we hit delete, it deletes. We can even make this button span full width. So it's going to take that entire width, just a little bit more prominent button. And yeah, this looks good. So we can say delete, and then it actually delete all of the posts. And if we have no posts left, it should show no posts. No posts found. This can be center aligned in the middle. So let's actually do that. Center align this in the middle. We have the post list, and we want to text align center this. So we can actually add this within the box and give that box full width. So height 100%, width 100%, and then we're gonna add it to the center of this box by display of grid. and place items center. Let's see if this works. We need to import the box from Material UI. Got that imported, and if we save this now and go back, refresh, we should see no posts found. Okay, so that is working good. Let's check out these links. They are not looking too good. So in the nav bar, we can add a style here, style and text decoration to none, and it should make it white. Okay, and let's just get the color to be inherit. So it should inherit from its parent. It should be white, and then the font family should also be inherited. Let's check if that works. Doesn't look like the font got inherited. Let's then add in a typography here to give it the Material UI font that we're using in our app so that it's just more consistent. I'm going to save this. I'm going to remove all of this over here. Let's check it out now. It's still being rendered as blue. So let's go ahead and change the color to inherit over here. Is this going to work? Did it already update? Doesn't look like it. What do we want here? Let's just set the color to be white. Okay, so we have these buttons, about, and the about us and homepage. So the about us page, we can center this in the middle, but let's work on this form here. Let's make that more beautiful. Okay, so not in the delete, but in the form dialog. Once again, we're going to add some sections. So we have the dialog title. Then we have the dialog content. And then we have the dialog actions. Okay. Make sure we've got everything imported, and then we can actually go ahead and remove all of these SX properties because it should be styled correctly now. Okay, let's take a look, and this looks a little bit better. The button is still not positioned correctly. I feel like there's margin somewhere. We have this padding. We can remove that from the paper because we have that within the container now. Content, and then the actions. And then the paper is creating a gap between each of these. So we can actually remove this as well. We can remove all of this. Okay, so it looked like this now. So for some reason the button is not in the same padding level as the rest. So these dialog actions, is it the same with, so let's create one, testing, create. If I do the delete, it's not, yeah, the button is a little bit more to the side. Okay, so this is a fine look. We can maybe give it some more padding, but that's fine. And here we just need to separate these a little bit. So we can give this one a margin at the bottom of 2. So let's create. You can see it's going to be a little bit of spacing. So this looks better, right? So now we can say, instead of, let's actually move this in here. I'm not liking the button that's been a little bit to the outside. I want it to be grouped with this. So we can move this style property to the middle one and then just make it a Y, so it has spacing between both of them. Okay, so this looks a little bit better to me. Now we need to update a few things. When we do the create, we should check if we have a formic.values.id. If there is an ID, then we want it to not say create, we want it to say update. Okay, so this is one basic change we can make. And another thing we can do is at the title level, when we have formic.values.id, then we know we're editing, else we want this one. Okay, so we can say edit post. Okay, so now it will update accordingly. If I click on edit, it shows edit post. If I create post, once I actually unfocus this element, it should clear the state. So once this form dialog gets closed, so I can have a use effect where I close this form dialog whenever it gets unmounted. Okay, so it doesn't get unmounted because it stays mounted. That's why the state is always there. So we need to clear it actually from here. So when we click on that actions, so let's go to the home page. Okay, and once we do the close function, so once we close these dialogues, they should be cleared. So on close, we not just want to do this, but we also want to clear the form. Same here. We don't just want to do this, we also want to clear the form. So we want to say formic.reset form every time we unfocus or close the dialog. So let's edit it. It's open. We open a new one and it got cleared every time. So now let's try and fill this in. We have some weird padding overlap there with the... So let's check that out. So we have some weird padding with this title and the dialog content. So here we probably need to add some padding within, or let's just do it in the Y direction. But we don't want to give anything to the X direction. Let's check it out. It's still overlapping, so let's make it a margin in the Y direction. Okay, so we have something overlapping in here. So let's go ahead and fix that. That's very strange, because it should be able to go above the margin. And it's all due to it being inside of this dialog content, I believe. So let's comment that out. I want to see if that makes a difference. Okay, so that's making the difference. So maybe on this dialog content, it's not helping we add this margin. Let's just import it again. Let's add to the top because the bottom one is fine. Let's save it back. So the bottom one, it's fine, but it's the top one. So we need to add some margin to the top. Let's just say of 1 or 2. There we go. Now it's working fine. On the edit, it's already populated. And let's create a new one. New post, post new, and create. You can see our new post, post new. This was created. We can edit it, update, and it got updated. We can also delete it and delete everything. Okay, so this is our application. I hope you found this tutorial useful.